What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was neglected but met a princess who wanted to destroy the leaf? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. It was late in the evening and the sun was slowly setting in the west, casting its lingering glow onto the land lucky enough to feel its retreating warmth. Two figures could be seen traveling along the road that led from the border of Kawa no Kuni, river country, to Tanzakugai, a small but lively town that was a fair distance from Konoha. One of the figures was a tall male standing about 6'4". He seemed to be in his early 40s or so, although he carried himself as someone half that age. He had extremely long and spiky white hair tied into a ponytail along with two shoulder-length bangs that framed both sides of his face. Red lines ran down from underneath his eyes to his jawline, and a unique head protector with the kanji of oil was emblazoned across the metallic object firmly rested upon his forehead. This man was Jiraiya, the famed toad sage of the Densetsu no Sannin, legendary 3 ninja, a former student of Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandaime Hokage, 3rd Hokage, Shinobi no Kami, god of ninja, and the professor. Jiraiya is also the author of the popular adult fiction book series called Icha Icha and is a self-proclaimed super pervert. The man walking next to him was roughly 5'11" and looked to be in his early to mid-20s. He wore the standard Konoha ninja uniform, a green flak jacket appropriate for his rank along with a short-sleeved and high-collared white coat with red flames adorning the edges that reached just past his knees. He had bright blue eyes and spiky blonde hair with bangs that stretched down to chin length and surrounded both sides of his face. He was considered quite handsome by the female populace of his native village and even beyond that, to the point that some instances of infatuation came from his physical appearance alone. This man was Namikaze Minato, the famed Konoha no Kiroi Senko, Konoha's Yellow Flash, Yondaime Hokage, 4th Hokage, and former student of Jiraiya. The two famous shinobi were on their way back to Konoha after successfully negotiating and signing an alliance with Sanagakure no Sato, village hidden in the sand, and its leader the Yondaime Case-Cage, 4th Case-Cage. Normally, it would be considered strange for a Cage of any village to be traveling in such a small party since, whenever it was suitable, he would be accompanied by at least a squad of Anbu or other shinobi of Jonin level. However, this obviously wasn't just any normal traveling duo. With both being Cage-level shinobi, the thought of even planning to attack them when they were together would be seen as complete lunacy by a majority of the strongest fighters out there in the elemental nations. They were both considered among the strongest in their own respective generations, maybe even the strongest depending on who was asked, and would only be stronger as a cohesive unit made up by a longtime teacher and student. In short, a protective detail was virtually unnecessary since an attack on the two was practically suicide. Well, Minato, at least we made it to Tanzakugai. Guess we won't have to sleep out on the forest floor tonight. Jiraiya spoke jokingly with a smile and a slight nudge to his pupil's side. Minato let out a small chuckle. I suppose you're right, he replied before looking a little wistful. And even with the Hiraishin no Jutsu, flying thunder god technique, to travel faster, I'd rather take a little time to relax and stay away from the paperwork back home. Celebrating a new alliance by checking into a nice hotel and going to a bar in the town sounds like a perfect excuse, doesn't it? The blonde nudged back good-naturedly. Now you're talking, the toad sage exclaimed in enthusiasm. Sake sounded perfect at the moment. Hell, we might even get you lucky tonight, he said cheekily as he smacked Minato on the back, making the blonde slightly buckle in his steps. Soon enough the two shinobi found an adequate hotel and booked a room immediately after entering the decently sized gambling village. It wasn't that much longer after that they went to the best bar near their hotel and unexpectedly met up with a familiar face enjoying her own free time. The person they found in the bar was a woman with blonde hair, of which was tied into a long ponytail that reached down to her lower hip with chin-length strands framing both sides of her face. A diamond-shaped mark imprinted on her forehead and striking brown eyes. If she were standing she'd be about 5'4" with a frame that was covered by a green haori with a kanji for gamble on it. Underneath her robe was a sleeveless gray kimono shirt along a dark obi around her waist and matching her short pants. However, her most prominent features were her extremely sizable s, which were about 106 centimeters according to Jiraiya's keen intellect. She's what most individuals would consider extremely attractive. The Toad Sage's eyes lit up in pleased recognition. My, it's been a while. I didn't expect to see you here tonight. The woman that Jiraiya called out to was none other than Senju Tsunade, the Slug Princess and only female member of the Densetsu no Sannin. Along with being the last living member of the Senju clan, she was also the granddaughter of Senju Hashirama, the Shodai Hokage, first Hokage, and grandniece of Senju Tobarama, the Naidame Hokage, second Hokage. With her aforementioned role in the Densetsu no Sannin, having the Sandaime Hokage as a teacher along with Jiraiya went without saying. Besides those bigger facts about herself, she was also credited by most as being the most beautiful woman in the world, which was of no surprise to those who have gazed upon her. It was also thanks to her efforts in healing and curing poisons that Konoha was even able to win the Second Great Shinobi World War, earning her the title of being the greatest Iryo Nin, medical nin, in the elemental nations. When Tsunade turned to see who called to her, the woman expected to see a debt collector. However, she was instead greeted to the side of her old teammate Jiraiya and his former student and current Hokage, Namikaze Minato. "Jiraiya, Minato, what are you two doing here?" asked Tsunade as she set down her saucer of sake and turned around on her barstool. "Minato and I just arrived in town just a little while ago. We just trekked through Kawa from Suna after negotiating an alliance between Suna and Konoha," replied Jiraiya with an almost hidden smile. The famed medic noticed the corner of his mouth twitch upwards. "So I take it that the discussions went well since you're here?" "Celebrating, maybe?" queried the Slug Princess. "Yeah, they ended fine, great, actually. Although the whole process was tough thanks to the Yondaime cage. He kept on trying to make the alliance favor Suna more instead of making it equal to both villages. It also didn't help that he made several snide remarks about Konoha being too soft and weak," replied Minato with a frown. He didn't like the Yondaime cage much. He often found him to be a rather cold and uncaring individual, especially with the way he ignored or passed off his pregnant wife, 3-year-old daughter and 2-year-old son as if they meant little to him. It was at this point that Minato finally noticed the young teenage girl who was quietly sitting next to Tsunade. The girl in question looked to be about 15 and was holding a little piglet in her arms. Her name was Shizune, Tsunade's apprentice and the niece of the female Senju's late lover, Kato Dan, a renowned shinobi of Konoha. When Minato saw her, he greeted the raven-haired adolescent kindly, causing a slight red tint to appear on her cheeks. Quickly trying to shake it off, she then bowed and greeted him respectfully by referring to him as Hokage-sama. Minato merely brushed off the official reception and told her to call him Minato, not by his title since they weren't currently in Konoha and he wasn't in the mood to be too businesslike. This only caused Shizune to blush deeper at being able to call probably the strongest shinobi alive in such a familiar way. The two males then went to sit down next to their new company with Minato sitting in between both of the older shinobi. Once both were secured on their own barstools, Tsunade continued the conversation. "So, who's looking after the village while you're away? Please tell me you didn't leave the village in the care of those old fossils Kaharu, Homura, Danzo or anyone else on the council," she asked. She never did like those 3 power-hungry old farts, what with them acting like they knew better than everyone else no matter the situation, and would often try to usurp the authority of others, especially the Hokages if they didn't agree with his decision. While they couldn't officially do anything, they could definitely bring on the guilt and play on people's emotions to get the rest of the council to change their minds. Danzo was reputably exceptional at doing so. "Nah, we left Sensei in charge until we get back," said the white-haired male. Tsunade nodded absently while twirling her saucer. "So, Minato, how is life being Hokage?" she asked before taking a savory sip of her sake. The younger blonde clicked his tongue in an exasperated fashion. "Hard, especially with all the paperwork I had to do and all the meetings I had to attend with the council. It doesn't leave me any time for a social life either," replied Minato as he took a sip of his own freshly ordered alcohol. "What about that cute little redhead Enbu girl from Uzushiogakure, village hidden by whirling tides, you were seeing? Kushina, wasn't that her name?" Jiraiya inquired with his chin being held by a calloused hand. It kind of didn't work out. I wanted to start a family with her, but 2 years ago she told me that she wanted to focus more on her career rather than having a relationship, Minato answered with a heavy sigh. Sorry to hear that, brat, Jiraiya said regretfully. He personally thought they were doing well, but sometimes it just wasn't meant to be. Minato only brushed Jiraiya off, saying that it was okay and that he was over her anyway at this point. So, drawled a now slightly tipsy Tsunade, I guess that means that you're back on the market for all those eligible ladies out there who want to be the next Mrs. Namikaze, she finished with a smirk. I guess you could say that, and would you be among those ladies, Tsunadeheim? Asked Minato with a small and playful smirk as he took another sip of sake. Ha, you wish, brat, laughed Tsunade as she took another large sip of sake from her saucer before refilling it. Over the next 4 hours the three talked about all kinds of various topics, switching back and forth from what came to mind in relation to Konoha and just about anything about the world in general. Not much of what was discussed would be remembered due to everyone's mental state being affected by the continuous alcohol intake, but they were enjoying themselves nonetheless. Of course, the young medical apprentice wasn't one to dabble in such activities for very long, mostly because it wasn't her thing and somebody had to be the rational and coherent one between her and sensei. That's why Shizune had left 2.5 hours prior to take care of the piglet at her own shared hotel room before turning in for the night. As she left the bar's doors she could only hope that the three would behave themselves since sticky situations weren't afraid to rear their ugly heads into the lives of eccentric shinobi, especially of those where alcohol was involved. Just past the 4-hour mark Jiraiya had passed out drunk on the bar counter with drool leaking carelessly from the corner of his mouth. Tsunade and Minato continued to talk with one another, however, and easily ignored the snoring and drooling Toad Sage. As they talked they continued to down more sake, becoming so intoxicated that the two cage-level shinobi began to flirt with one another. You know, Tsunade, I had the biggest crush on you when I was a genin, Minato slurred, wobbling a bit even in a seated position. Tsunade snickered slightly with an immediate hiccup following. Well, I'm honored, Minato-kun. Tsunade replied in the same fashion. The two continued to flirt back and forth like this until Tsunade suddenly said, maybe we can have our own little party. Back at my room. To celebrate Konoha's new alliance with Suna. Giggled a fully inebriated Tsunade like a little schoolgirl. Lead the way, Haim, said the equally intoxicated Hokage. Soon enough, the two drunken shinobi staggered away from the bar, leaving the passed-out Jiraiya to his lonesome as he let out a few lecherous giggles from an apparent dream he was having. He would later be promptly thrown out on the street soon after they left when the bartender decided to close up. The two blondes reached Tsunade's room at the same hotel where Minato and Jiraiya were staying at and entered the room. The instant the door was closed they quickly and drunkenly began removing each other's clothing and proceeded to examine one another in a disorderly yet heated passion. For most of the night moans, grunts and giggling could be heard coming from Tsunade's room, sounds that didn't quell until very late into the night. Next morning in Tsunade's room. Late the next morning, Tsunade slowly woke up with a groan due to the massive hangover that she was currently feeling and the light blaring from the sun in her eyes, prompting her to turn over on the bed and face away from the window. Ooh. My head. That's the last time I celebrate with Jiraiya and Minato like that, thought the weary Tsunade. After a little stretching and trying to blink away any mental and physical blurriness she froze and came to a stark realization. She was naked. Then she heard a groan next to her. Ever so slowly she turned her head to the space on the bed to her right. Trepidation quickly filled her gut more and more with every fraction of a second that went by in the process until her brown eyes gazed at the bare back of a man with spiky blonde hair. The reaction was instantaneous. Ah! Screamed Tsunade as she jumped out of the bed and pulled the bed covers with her to cover her modesty. As soon as she pulled the blanket, the man next to her jerked over the side and fell off the bed, crashing onto the floor and causing him to groan again, this time in even more pain than his own previous and quickly interrupted hazy awakening. After a quick moment or so the mystery man slowly sat up from the other side of the bed, holding his head from the painful hangover he was sporting and from the large bump that was forming on his head after hitting the unforgiving bedroom floor. It was as the man's head peeked over the mattress that Tsunade realized who the man was. Minato? Tsunade shouted. Minato cringed at Tsunade's loud voice, easily increasing the throbbing pain in his head. It was when he gained his bearings and looked at Tsunade's shocked face that a confused look swept across his visage. "Tsunade, what are you doing here in my room?" he bluntly asked. "Your room? This is my room, you idiot. I should be the one asking that, not you. Not to mention, why are you naked in my bed?" exclaimed Tsunade, and she pointed at him angrily with a shaking finger. "Huh?" sounded Minato as he looked down at himself and saw that he was indeed naked as a jaybird. Upon realizing this, the young man's face turned bright red before he quickly grabbed a nearby pillow to hastily cover little Minato. What happened last night? The last thing I can remember is the two of us drinking and talking while Sensei was passed out. Minato groaned as he held his head from the lingering pain. "The last thing I remember was..." Tsunade drawled as she tried to remember what had exactly happened. When the memory hit her, their activities came back in a series of fast flashbacks, making the female Sannin suddenly turn bright red in embarrassment, just like her fellow blonde. Weirdly enough, as Minato watched Tsunade's face turning various shades of red, he too began to remember what they did last night, causing him to blush even brighter than before, if that was even impossible. Quickly enough, an angry Tsunade focused all of her attention at Minato and pointed accusingly at him. "You damn bastard, you took advantage of me when I was too drunk to think straight." Minato broke out of his momentary embarrassment. "Me? I wasn't the one who was flirting like a hormonal fangirl at the bar. You were the one who started it all," Minato retorted defensively. "Don't you dare try and blame me. You admitted it yourself that you had a thing for me since your genin days last night. That's why you decided to take advantage of me when I was vulnerable. Hey now, I wasn't the one who invited me into your room. It was all your idea to come here, so if there was anyone who was taken advantage of, it was me. You had your way with me like some doctor and patient roleplay in the bedsheets against my will." For the next 10 minutes the two continued to try and place the blame on one another, but eventually they reluctantly agreed that it was both of their faults. It wasn't long at all that they then hurriedly got dressed and decided that they would keep what happened a secret between the two of them, especially from a certain super pervert they both knew. If Jiraiya ever found out, he would never let either of them live it down and would most likely become another installment in his next book. After a few minutes, Minato quickly left Tsunade's room and decided to head back to his own on a lower floor, hoping that Jiraiya hadn't woken up yet. That is, if his sensei made it back. Just as he was about to open the door, an all too familiar voice cried out to him. "Hey, Minato." When Minato turned around, he saw his sensei coming towards him from the stairs leading to the ground floor of the hotel. Jiraiya continued, "Glad to see that you're up. I figured you'd still be sleeping like a stone from all the fun last night. You were about to come look for me, weren't you?" Jiraiya asked as he came up to the blonde. Yeah, that's right, sensei," Minato let out nervously, while secretly and immensely glad that Jiraiya apparently didn't make it back to see that he was absent from their shared room. The Toad Sage's face then gained a skeptical and semi-serious impression. "It seems that I was left passed out in the bar by myself. I was even thrown out on the street where I just so happened to wake up a little bit ago." Jiraiya narrowed his eyes at the young Hokage. "So why didn't you bring me back to our room last night?" "Well, you see, the thing was, stuttered out a nervous Minato as he tried to come up with a believable excuse, and failing quite miserably at that, if his facial expression alone was anything to go by. It was at this time that Jiraiya detected a certain scent coming from the young man's person. "Minato, what's that smell coming from you?" Jiraiya closed in uncomfortably close and began to sniff his clothes. "Is that perfume?" he asked curiously. Minato began to get even more nervous as he silently cursed himself for not showering. It was extremely easy to deduce that he must have gotten some of Tsunade's perfume on his clothing when they were becoming familiar with each other. He knew that if his sensei recognized the smell, he would quickly understand what happened last night, something that Minato was confident would end his time among the land of the living. To only affirm Minato's growing fears, a knowing and very perverted smirk appeared on the Toad Sage's face. "Listen, sensei, I can explain," began Minato as he tried to dig up anything from his reliable intellect to get him out of this situation. "What's there to explain?" Jiraiya exclaimed with a surprising amount of gusto. "You got lucky with some hot young lady from the bar last night, didn't you, brat?" he asked with his smirk growing in confidence. "Huh?" was Minato's intelligent response, not expecting this sort of response from the older man. Well, maybe in hindsight it shouldn't be all too surprising. Come on, Minato, I can smell the perfume coming off your clothes. There's no need to hide your manly triumph. If you had just told me that from the start, I would have understood. So who is she? Was it that smoking hot barmaid that winked at you last night when she served us our drinks? Or was it one of those young ladies at the nearby table who were eyeing you? Come on, you can tell me, probed the massively grinning Jiraiya as he nudged his elbow into Minato's side proudly, wanting to hear all the details for his next book. Yeah, you're right, sensei. I guess I can't hide anything from you. Minato responded after a moment before letting out a silent yet huge sigh of relief. Jiraiya was getting a little too close for comfort there. So are you going to tell me all about how it was or who you were with? Jiraiya continued to nudge Minato even more, hoping to get as much details as possible and grinning like the pervert he proudly was. Deciding to change the subject quickly, Minato acted fast. Maybe later, sensei. How about we get going? If we leave now, we can reach Konoha before nightfall. Minato took the initiative by heading towards the stairs where Jiraiya thankfully followed. As they walked down the steps, Jiraiya, in his full-fledged super pervert mode, followed closely behind him trying to get any juicy information. Come on, brat, you gotta give me something. Is she a blonde, a brunette, maybe even another redhead? Is she a moaner or a screamer? At least tell me if I know her. Come on, at least give me that. Jiraiya pleaded. Minato just ignored his sensei's wishes, all the while thinking, if only you knew, sensei. If only you knew. 1 month later, Tsunade was lying down on a bed in a hotel that she and Shizune have been staying at for a while, with the latter using medical ninjutsu to run a medical scan on her master. The medical apprentice's hand was resting above Tsunade's navel and sending small pulses of chakra to examine any irregularities. She was doing this not only because her abilities were critically needed right now, but also because she was the only one that Tsunade trusted without question. After Shizune finished her scan on Tsunade, she confirmed what Tsunade believed when she realized that she missed her period. She was pregnant. Tsunade bolted up from her laying position and quickly started to put on her clothes back on. When I find that bastard, I'm going to kill him, revive him and then kill him again. Tsunade angrily raged in her mind, her face obviously conveying the roaring emotions without even trying to hide them. Shizune, get ready to leave. We're heading for Konoha, Tsunade ordered heatedly. This of course shocked her apprentice, but it wasn't due to her master speaking in such a way at her. It was because she had said that they were going to Konoha, the very place Tsunade swore she would never step foot in again. It was a typical and peaceful day in Konoha. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and there was a nice, cool, gentle breeze coming in from the west. At the main gate of this currently tranquil shinobi village were 2 Konoha chunin who were happily relaxing in their assigned post. Taking advantage in the serenity surrounding them, they enjoyed it all by leaning back on the 2 rear legs of their chairs and rested their feet on the desk of the entrance booth. "Ah, this is the life, isn't it?" said one of the chunin, enjoying the huge lack of traffic going in or out of their village. "Yeah, nothing to do but relax, enjoy the sun, and let life pass you by slowly," said the other with a content sigh. The first guard barely opened his eyes from their closed position to stare at a passing cloud. "True, but I would still give a lot for something interesting to happen," he pondered. "You know the old saying, be careful for what you wish for because you just might ge." The second started, but immediately stopped when he felt the ground shake beneath him and nearly fell from his chair. When he regained his bearings and opened his eyes, he saw something that made him pale and freeze with fear. Senju Tsunade was back in Konoha after so long, and she was stomping towards them like some wrathful giant. For every step she took, the ground would crack in small spiderweb-like patterns, leaving a vengeful trail behind her. As she headed towards them, they could practically see a black aura emanate around her that spoke of slow, agonizing pain and death. But the thing that freaked the 2 chunin out the most was the disturbing red fire in her eyes that would have sent even the bravest and mightiest cage-level shinobi running for the hills. Scurrying behind Tsunade was a young teenage girl with short black hair who was carrying a small piglet in her arms. She seemed to be trying and failing to calm down her vengeful master with her unheard and frantic words, but they looked to be for naught. As she and Tsunade passed by the chunin, they saw that they were staying on the main path heading towards the Hokage Tower. They also could have sworn they heard Tsunade saying something about killing some poor bastard along with all the different ways she was going to do it. As her form disappeared and joined the general populace in the distance, the two trained soldiers of Konoha quickly broke out of their stupors. The second Chunin paused before saying, "Didn't I tell you to be careful what you wish for?" The first just nodded dumbly and said, "Who do you think pissed her off that much to come back here?" "I don't know. But may Kami have mercy on his soul, for Tsunade-sama will not." Both men shivered at the thought of what the famed Senju Kunoichi would do to her unfortunate target and began to silently pray for the man who was about to painfully enter the next life at the hands of a vengeful slug princess. They could only imagine what would have also happened if they asked her to sign in the logbook. In the Hokage office, Minato was currently sitting at his desk discussing some matter about the village with Hiruzen and Jiraiya, who were sitting across from him. However, their talk was cut short when he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine, causing him to visibly shudder. It was easy for the Toad Sage to notice. "Hey, Minato, are you okay? Something wrong?" "I don't know." He looked to be deep in thought. "I just felt as if someone had walked over my grave," he replied. Before either Hiruzen or Jiraiya could reply to Minato's comment, they heard loud noises coming from the other side of the double doors to the office. "I don't care if he is in a meeting with Kami himself. I'm going in there and you can't stop me," shouted an angry female voice that was unfortunately familiar to the three men. Immediately the three started to hear various noises coming from behind the closed doors. There seemed to be some scuffling, random things breaking and maybe even bones breaking, a man screaming in pain and a woman screaming in abject horror. Even after years of violent experience under their belts, none of the men were prepared when the double doors were knocked off of their hinges due to one of the Anbu guards from outside being thrown into it with a righteous fury. The elite shinobi then continued his flight and smashed through the window that was behind Minato and overlooking the village, the double doors chasing after him towards the streets below and causing the three men in the office to duck for cover. As they raised their heads after a moment, they were greeted with a sight that would have put the Shinigami to shame. A vengeful-looking Tsunade with fires of unholy rage burning around her form and licking away at the ceiling. The sight was made all the worse for Minato since Tsunade locked her eyes firmly onto him. Minato could swear that if looks could kill, he'd be nothing more than a smoking crater where he sat. Behind Tsunade, the three men peered out into the waiting hall outside the Hokage office and observed her path of hell. The place looked as if a bomb had gone off, with cracks, dents, and holes on the floor, ceiling, and walls. They saw the secretary desperately run and disappear around the corner, trying to get as far away from the walking hurricane as fast as humanly possible, while the other Anbu guard was groaning in pain on the floor. None of the men could blame him since he now looked like a human-sized pretzel with his arms and legs clearly being broken and bent in a position that were simply not natural. They would do good to remember to send him a card and some flowers in the hospital. Directly behind Tsunade was Shizune, who had grabbed onto the back end of the Senju's green haori in a futile attempt to hold her back. Since the young medic Nin's sandals were continuously being dragged along the debris-ridden floor, the men guessed any of her efforts were no match for her master. Tsunade finally ended her hunt when she raised her hand and pointed accusingly at the blonde Hokage. "There you are, you bastard. When I get my hands on you, I'm going to rip out your balls through your ass," roared the furious Senju, causing the three men to subconsciously take a step back in fear and cover their manhoods at the mental image their minds had conjured up. Suddenly, two more Anbu who were hidden in the rafters of the office appeared in front of Minato to protect their Hokage. "Tsunade-sama, please stop your advance towards the Hokage or else we'll have no choice but to use fork," spoke one of the Anbu, but froze mid-word when Tsunade locked eyes with him and saw nothing but promises of pain, suffering, and a dash of living hell on earth in those honey-colored orbs. Tsunade turned her glare to the second Anbu, and the man could swear that her eyes were drilling holes into his head. She then spoke in a tone that all but guaranteed pain and death if he did not listen and obey. "If you and your friend here know what's good for you, the both of you will move and stay out of my way. Because if you don't, I will do far worse to you both than what I did with your friend back there when he tried to stop me." Without removing her gaze from them, she pointed back at the still groaning Anbu behind her that was now a human pretzel, "In which case by the time I'm done with you, the medic Nins won't be able to tell the difference between your asses and your heads, and you will both be choking on your own balls." When the two Anbu looked at what had become of their comrade, they quietly gulped behind their masks, looked at one another, and deeply pondered their choices. The first option was to try defend their Hokage with their lives like any true Anbu member, but of course they would most likely be killed or suffer a worse fate than the one their twisted comrade had endured. The second choice was that they could move aside and let Tsunade through, where she would proceed to dismember and most likely kill their Hokage. But they would live. The choice was clear. The two Anbu silently nodded in agreement, and as if they could read each other's mind, they turned to Minato, who was looking at them in silent curiosity before they spoke in strange unison. "Forgive us, Hokage-sama, but we enjoy living too much and having our body parts the way they are now," spoke the two Anbu together, at which point they both used a shunshin to get the pretzel-shaped Anbu and then used it again to make their escape. None of their comrades would blame them. Cowards, the both of them. What happened to protecting and serving the Hokage with your lives? Minato thought angrily. Although at the way that Tsunade was looking at him, he was starting to think that the two shinobi might have had the right idea, since he was wishing that he was anywhere but his office at the moment. As Tsunade walked towards Minato with the intent to reach over his desk and begin wringing his neck, Jiraiya bravely or foolishly, depending on who was asked, placed himself between Minato and the wrathful Senju. "Hey now, Haim, calm down and tell us what's going on. I don't know what you think Minato did to you, but I really think he's gotta be innocent. He's been here the whole time and he would never do anything that would get you this mad at him." "I know him better than that," said the Toad Sage, really hoping he would be able to calm his angry teammate down. Although as he tried, he recalled only one other time ever seeing Tsunade this mad. The one time he ever peeked in on her when she was in the Konoha hot springs. "Here the whole time?" "Here the whole time except for that night at Tanzaku Gai where he got me drunk and we spent the night at that shitty hotel where he knocked me up," shouted the surprisingly angrier medic. "Huh," Jiraiya muttered as all sounds ceased around them. He honestly couldn't quite believe what he just heard and was soon joined by Hiruzen and Minato, who were equally gobsmacked. "Are you all deaf or are you too thick-headed to understand? Well, here it is, plain and simple so that even you dumbasses can understand." The other three were still frozen. "That bastard student of yours got me pregnant," she roared at her teammate. This of course got an immediate reaction from the famous shinobi. Hiruzen's eyes grew to the size of saucers on his wrinkled face as his jaw hit the floor. Jiraiya was doing a perfect imitation of a gaping fish since his brain had shut down, simply not being able to compute what his ears just absorbed. Minato, he just fainted. Shizune couldn't blame them since she was in the same boat when she found out. To say that the medical apprentice was shocked when her sensei told her that she had slept with the Yondaime Hokage and was now carrying his child, something that many women all over Konoha would have loved to have done, would be like saying that Jiraiya was only a little perverted. "Tsunade-sama, please calm down. All this stress can't be good for the baby," Shizune pleaded gently at the end. Surprisingly, this comment seemed to have gotten through to Tsunade. She paused to gather her thoughts and started to calm down a bit after taking a deep breath. Quickly Hiruzen got over his shock and went over to Minato to awaken the young cage. When Minato's eyes started to open up, his predecessor helped him up onto his feet before the male blonde looked towards the cause of all the excitement. Why you're pregnant?" Minato barely uttered above a whisper, the shock still clearly in his system. "Isn't that what I just said, you idiot?" Tsunade retorted with gritted teeth, severely wanting to gauge his eyes out with a blunt senbon while simultaneously trying to control herself. "BBB, but why you can't be, I mean," Minato stuttered, "the incident? There's no way that you got. Tell that to my fucking uterus, you bastard," bellowed Tsunade as she took a step around Jiraiya, who was still doing his fish imitation, towards to Minato as her murderous intent returned full force. "Tsunade-sama, please," begged Shizune. The dark-haired girl was fearful of what the stress would do to not only the baby but to her sensei as well. Even the little piglet Taunton was trying to get her master to calm down by biting and pulling at Tsunade's high-heeled sandals. These actions started to calm herself down once more as she tried taking even more deep breaths followed by mentally counting to 10. It was at this point that Jiraiya's brain started to reboot before he quickly appeared in front of Minato on bended knees and started crying tears of joy. "Minato, my boy, I never thought I could be more proud of you than when you created the Hiraishin no Jutsu, Flying Thunder God technique. Or when you became Hokage, but I am. You have surpassed me yet again and did what I could never do. You slept with Tsunade, exclaimed the crying toad sage as the twin rivers of proud perspiration continued to flow down his cheeks. Please, he suddenly shouted as he raised his eyes to meet his students and roughly grabbed onto his trademark Haori. Tell me what it was like to partake in the fruits of those heavenly bosoms of hers. Was she a moaner or a screamer? Please, I need to know. The Yondaime and Sandame didn't know how to react to this installment. Jiraiya suddenly stood up and went into a thinking pose. Although, now that I think about it, I should have known that Tsunade liked younger men. I mean, there had to be some reason as to why she never seemed to fall for my manly charms. Still, I never took Tsunade as a cougar, he pondered casually. This, of course, had not helped the mother-to-be to keep her calm. She was barely containing her temper after Jiraiya began to beg for information on the night that led to all of this. The fact that she was also in the beginning of her first trimester where her emotions were beginning to go out of whack, and she had already suffered some mood swings earlier to prove that, was not helping matters either. With all of that combined, when her teammate made the remark of saying she was a cougar, it was the final straw that broke the camel's back. The elder Sarutobi smacked his palm to his face and covered his eyes in embarrassment, partially because Jiraiya was never one of his brightest pupils, and also because he wouldn't have to see the dismemberment and murder of someone he considered a son at the hands of someone he considered a daughter. The Sandame had the right idea since Tsunade swiftly pounced on Jiraiya like a real live cougar while screaming out, "Pervert," before proceeding to beat him within an inch of his life. Minato, who was still in astonishment at what Tsunade had told him, spared a small part of his mind to feel sorry for his sensei since it technically was his fault that the man was probably about to be sent the afterlife. Not even a few seconds in the self-proclaimed super pervert was screaming out in pain and begging for mercy, receiving none as Tsunade continued to beat the sage to within an inch of his life. After about 10 minutes or so, in which Tsunade had mauled Jiraiya to the point that he didn't even look human anymore and shouldn't even be alive by all rights, Shizune had finally been able to calm her sensei down again. Minato took this moment to start the conversation again. Hey, are you sure? I mean, well, of course you're sure. You're a med nin, but how? I mean, well, of course I know how, but don't you have Urdu? Or well, by all that's holy, what are we going to do? He cried as he held his aching head in frustration. He just wasn't mentally prepared for all of this. You'd better not be thinking beyond. How are we going to explain this to the council or everyone else in the village? Because if you're thinking of me getting rid of it. Tsunade started as she felt her temper rising again. The growing need to neuter the blonde-haired man with a dull scalpel and no sedative beginning to run through mind. No, I would never think of ever forcing you to get rid of it. Minato desperately stammered out. He had always wanted to start a family, even if this wasn't exactly how he planned to do it. Thankfully, Minato's quick response was able to soothe Tsunade's rising anger a little and sated her desire to castrate the younger man at the very least. Well then, you better not be thinking, who's it going to live with? Because I'm not going to stay in this cursed village. I've already lost nearly everyone I ever cared about to it, and I'm not going to lose my child to it as well. She declared with perseverance. This led to Minato and Tsunade discussing, more like arguing, rather, about what they were going to do. Dealing with the prospect of a newborn was hard in general, but in this context it might as well been planning to survive the apocalypse. As Tsunade and Minato were conversing, Hiruzen watched them and couldn't help but grin. While this certainly threw a major wrench in the works of both Minato's and Tsunade's lives, it just might prove to be a really good thing for both of them. Since, with a child, Tsunade might finally come out of her depression that she had been spiraling down since the loss of her lover, Dan, and her little brother, Nawaki. The wizened former Hokage knew that when she was with Dan they had often talked about having children, and Tsunade made it obvious she wanted nothing more. Of course, that dream had sadly died with him. Now it seemed that fate had decided to finally give his former student some measure of happiness by giving her the chance to reclaim that dream. Even though he knew that Tsunade would be disappointed that it was not Dan's child she was carrying, it still didn't change the fact that it was her child. She would never get rid of it and would love it all the same, he was sure of that. He also knew that with a child there was a good chance that Tsunade might return to Konoha as well, although it would not be right now, but given time she just might. From personal experience, the Sarutobi cleanhead understood that the power of love between a parent and its child could heal almost any emotional wound. There was also the chance that this child could help Minato out as well, since he had never gotten over the loss of his parents last year. They had been killed by Iwa assassins who had somehow managed to sneak into the village. Their murder was retaliation for a major defeat that Iwa had suffered at Minato's hands. Although Minato had killed those responsible, it still affected him greatly. What was not widely known was that he was secretly afraid to start a relationship with anyone. The doubt that was seeded into his mind from his loss gave him a small fear of not being able to protect those he loved. After the event, it had taken quite a while for Jiraiya to get Minato out of his depression, but the blonde had never been the same. His and Tsunade's future child might be exactly what he needed to heal any lingering wounds to his heart. Hiruzen grinned a bit more when he thought of the child and about how powerful it would be, considering the rich lineage that would flow its veins. Having its great-grandfather be the Shodem Hokage, great-granduncle the Nidame Hokage, mother the Slug Princess and strongest kunoichi alive, and father the legendary Konoha no Kiroi Senko, Konoha's Yellow Flash, and Yondaime Hokage, the potential seemed limitless. With just both its parents being cage-level shinobi alone, the child would be powerhouse, a monster, in a good way, of course. A Hokage in the making that could very well surpass all the previous Hokages. The former Hokage then began to imagine holding an amazingly strong little warrior with godlike chakra control on his knees, and it made him smile all the more. As he thought about this, however, he also thought of something else that made him frown. Deciding to make himself known to the bickering duo, Hiruzen cleared his throat loudly so that they would take notice of him. "Now that I have your attention, I believe that there is a matter that you are forgetting that is of great importance to discuss." "What is it?" asked a still fuming Tsunade. "Your child, or, to be more precise, its life," the Sandame sternly announced. "Huh?" Both Minato and Tsunade sounded in unison. Hiruzen eyed them to make sure they were paying the utmost attention. "Tell me, Tsunade, does anyone else know that you are pregnant with Minato's child, or that you're pregnant at all? Other than you, Shizune, the pervert here, and this bastard, then no," said Tsunade, pointing at Jiraiya and Minato respectively. "Good," he replied. "Good. Why is that good?" Tsunade asked with a cocked brow. "Your child's life would be in great danger otherwise, is why. Something like this is extremely dangerous and will not remain a secret forever. From the moment it is born into this world, your child will have a target placed on it by other villages, organizations, and factions of shinobi inside and outside of Konoha." The words seemed to start piercing into everyone's brains, so he continued. "They will attempt to kidnap your child in the hopes of holding it hostage to force you to do what they want or to train it to fight for them. Other villages may just kidnap it and use it for breeding to rebuild the Senju clan in their territory, because even today your clan's power and prestige is still well known and respected all over the elemental nations. Many villages would love nothing more than to have that at their disposal. Those very villages and organizations may even decide to send assassins and have your child killed to prevent the very same thing from occurring here in Konoha. And let's not forget that both you and your clan still have many enemies out there that would like nothing more than to end the Senju bloodline once and for all, or would just like to hurt you by killing your child," he ended, deathly serious. This of course made Tsunade go white in fear, not for herself but for her child. She hadn't really thought of the dangers her child would be in by her simply being its mother, and was only more focused on the here and now, with her raw emotions guiding her to this point. She instinctually wrapped both her arms around her abdomen protectively as more and more dangerous possibilities swam through her mind for her child's future. And when word gets out that Minato is the father, the child will be placed in even greater danger. Like with Tsunade, outside forces will do everything within their power to turn or eliminate him, just like your parents, Minato. A pained look crossed the young Kage's face. And don't forget, Iwa would be at the top of that list, all things considered, during the war. Ending your family would have them frothing at the mouth if given the opportunity. "So what do we do then? Because if you're saying that I have to abandon my child, then you have." Tsunade barely managed to growl before she was interrupted. "No, of course not, Tsunade. I would never think of asking you and Minato to do such a thing," Hiruzen quickly said, seeing where his former student's line of thought was going. As a father, he knew how painful it would be to ask a parent to give up his or her child. He himself would sooner rip off his own arm than give up any of his own children, and most certainly wouldn't ever ask someone else to do something that he couldn't. He also knew that if he did force her to give up the child, she would never forgive him. The heartbreak of losing her baby would also most likely send her into an even deeper depression, one that she would never recover from and would inevitably cause her to drink herself to death. He didn't like the thought of adding another mental scar to his surrogate daughter and everyone close to her, all because of some rash decision. Besides, he knew Tsunade would protect her child no matter what and from whoever tried to harm it. From past experience, they all knew that there was nothing in this world more dangerous than a mother protecting its child, especially if that mother happened to be Tsunade. And may Kami have mercy on whatever foolish soul that tried to do the child harm, since Tsunade definitely would not. What I mean, Tsunade, is that we have to be careful and plan out what we should do. That's all. If we don't, we could be putting your child in danger. That is all I'm suggesting, the old man said. He's right. We have to be careful for our child's sake at least. Perhaps you could come back to the village and, said Minato before being interrupted. No, I told you before, I will not stay in this accursed village. Short of Shizune, too, and this child, I've lost every single member of my family and clan to it. I will not lose another person to this village again, she stubbornly said as she stomped her foot down on the floor, causing the room to shake and making her point clear. But, Tsunade, you can't go around traveling while you're pregnant. What if you're attacked, or something happens and we weren't there to help? You're putting our child in danger, so please think what is best for it, pleaded Minato. I said no, and that's my final answer. Heroines cut in quickly to prevent another argument from happening. Perhaps there can be a compromise, he stated, causing both Minato and Tsunade to look at the former Hokage. Like what? Tsunade asked with narrowed eyes. For the past several years, the small nearby farming village of Mihara has sent several requests to us asking to send a medic or medical nin to their village. Their community has no real doctor to treat the injured and sick, and they usually have to travel here to get any help, or send someone to bring back medical aid depending on the situation. Now, if they had their own doctor to train someone there, then they could help themselves. My solution is that you two, he indicated Tsunade and Shizune, go there where you can help the people and train someone to help with their minor illnesses and injuries that they suffer from. In doing so, there should be little to nothing for you to do. Also, since the village is near us and our patrol forces have roots near it, help can quickly arrive quickly and with little trouble given something happens to you while you're there. Not to mention that if Minato gives you one of his special kunai, he can use his Hiraishin no Jutsu to immediately teleport there at any time or when you need help. Therefore, you each get what you want. Tsunade doesn't need to stay in the village like she wants, but she is near enough so that help can arrive quickly if she needs it like Minato wants. Also, the village of Mihara even gets what they want, so it's a win-win for everyone, he finished as he picked up his pipe from the floor, it having dropped from his grip when Tsunade made her announcement following her dramatic entrance. He then lit it and started to puff smoke out to let the calming scent of tobacco filter through his nostrils. After Minato and Tsunade heard Sarutobi's solution, they thought about it for a few minutes and both nodded in agreement. To them it seemed acceptable enough to ease each other's minds. Fine then, I'll just get some things from the hospital before I head out to the village to set things up. If I need anything, I'll send one of my slug summons to tell you, Tsunade stated. Before you go, Tsunade, take this, Minato said as he took out one of his Hiraishin kunai from his pouch before gently handing it to her. She took the kunai and nodded her thanks, before turning to walk out of the office through the broken doorway. Shizune and Taunton loyally followed after giving a half-hearted farewell. Once Tsunade had left out of earshot, both Minato and Hiruzen let a sigh of exhaustion. Their talk with Tsunade and the bombshell she had dropped had drained them both more than they had thought possible. Jiraiya, on the other hand, was lying forgotten in a heap till he started groaning in pain. He was covered in black and blue bruises and bumps, and his arms, legs, and back were in a myriad of shapes and angles that they definitely shouldn't be. Both Minato and Hiruzen wondered how the super pervert was even alive after what happened to him, and if he had some kind of Kekkei Genkei bloodline limit that was the source of his ability to survive that kind of beating. Hell, with all of his past beatings over his numerous peeping sessions, this only supported the possibility. Minato, I think you should take him to the hospital where they can at least try to fix him, though we may have to ask Tsunade to do so if they can't. Hiruzen muttered as he blankly gazed down at Jiraiya's poor form. Yeah, although it's his own fault that he usually ends up like this. These kind of things would never happen to him if he could just control those perverted urges and thoughts of his, the blonde said exasperatedly. True, but if he didn't, then we wouldn't have those books of his to enjoy. Besides, I'm told that an artist must suffer for his art, and Jiraiya often refers himself as an artist with those novels of his. Hiruzen and Minato just smirked at each other before the latter used a shunshin to quickly take Jiraiya to the hospital. We certainly live in interesting times, don't we? The Sandaime thought with a slight chuckle as he looked out the window to overlook the beautiful village in its entirety. For the next 9 months Tsunade helped the people of Mihara. Most of her duties mainly dealt with small illnesses and injuries that locals got while farming, along with training a very eager and bright young village girl in the art of healing. The girl's name was Kara, who had a surprisingly good amount of knowledge in herbs. Even before Tsunade's guidance, she could easily tell what certain herbs were appropriate for specific ailments. During their stay, Tsunade and Shizune trained their new student in how to treat people in different ways while also expanding her herbal intellect. Kara was a quick study, and after a few months she was good enough to easily handle any of the small infirmities and physical damages that inflicted those around the village. Even so, Tsunade and Shizune offered a helping hand whenever they could and tried to train her up as much as possible. Between medical duties, Tsunade also found her temporary life in the village to be quite peaceful and relaxing. However, the big reminder of her reason being there started to lean its head in as time went on when she began to show signs of her pregnancy, although when she did, she quickly used her genjutsu skills to hide her growing belly. It was only released in private, understandably so, to keep anyone outside her little circle from finding out. In the same duration, Hiruzen, Jiraiya and Minato all visited Tsunade whenever they could. They randomly did it 1 or 2 at a time or all together by having Minato transport them through his Hiraishin no Jutsu, not just because of convenience but because it helped them stray away from any attention if they were careful. However, before this point they knew they had to deal with Tsunade's abrupt appearance in Konoha, since she definitely raised plenty of questions to say the least. This was solved by a relatively simple cover-up story that was pitched by Minato. The tale that would be spread throughout the public was that Tsunade charged into the village because of Jiraiya's latest installment in his Icha Icha series. After finding out that her former teammate based a character on her recognizable likeness, a character that fell in love with a white-haired toad magician before indulging in plenty of nights together in a heavily perverse nature, she took matters into her own hands. Once her beating was delivered, along with her message to discontinue the character she inspired deep within his dented skull, she was satisfied. Thankfully, the ruse was accepted quickly enough because of the pervert's reputation, along with his extremely poor physical state that showed up through the hospital's front doors as he was dragged by the blonde Hokage to be treated in intensive care. To anyone that knew of Jiraiya enough, this wouldn't be the first time his less than innocent thoughts and actions got him a good beating from Tsunade, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. And that's not mentioning the various women of past and future years that have and will get in a good lick or two every now and then on the poor toad sage. Anyway, it was during those visits that the 3 gentlemen noticed that Tsunade had a sort of glow around her, one filled only with the happiness that came along the path of motherhood. Even with almost no contact at all with her over the years, it truly seemed that she was happier than she had been in a long time. This sort of change brought about even more surprise when she said she considered giving up drinking after her pregnancy. Of course, it would be very damaging to consume alcohol during these 9 important months, and being an experienced medic only cemented this fact, but to take the abstinence beyond that really showed the drastic changes she was experiencing. Sadly, when she wasn't happy, she and the others became victims of any mood swings that took over her mind. At any moment she'd be as happy as can be, angry as all hell, and sad to the point of spontaneously crying her eyes out. Fortunately, there seemed to be a constant pattern of Hiruzen and Shizune dealing with the sad Tsunade, while Minato and Jiraiya unfortunately always seemed stuck with the angry one. To the latter two's misfortune, her anger usually ended with them acquiring various physical injuries such as black eyes, concussions, and even fractured or outright broken noses and jaws. Jiraiya got the worst of it when his brain let him go a little too far once again during the Senju's first trimester. When it was obvious that Tsunade's already impressive assets began to enlarge due to milk production, the famous pervert just had to make an offhand comment about his blonde teammate not being able to stand correctly, let alone move. Normally, such a comment could be shaken off with some annoyance, but it was regrettably spoken when anger was Tsunade's main and sensitive mood at the time. The result, to Jiraiya's immense misfortune, was a near 2-month recovery period in intensive care. Again, around when Tsunade's second trimester came along, she had her apprentice run a very delicate scan to determine her babies, apparently not wanting to keep the suspense hanging in the air. When Shizune completed the procedure, she happily revealed Tsunade was going to mother a son, causing the Senju to have another of her more frequent and genuine smiles and Minato to pause in his tracks before promptly fainting. A little while after the Hokage came to, Minato already had a name in mind for his future son. Naruto, the very same name of the main character in Jiraiya's lone non-erotic novel, The Tale of the Utterly Gutsy Shinobi. It did take a little research on Tsunade's part to make sure her son's name came from something that wasn't perverted, but she agreed. Soon after, both Tsunade and Minato took it a step farther by naming Jiraiya and Shizune as Naruto's godparents. Even Hiruzen was welcomed to take on a grandfatherly role in the unborn child's life, most in part from being the closest thing to a father Tsunade had after losing hers during the First War. Needless to say, they were all greatly happy and honored and were looking forward to being important parts in Naruto's life. It was a few months later when the magical moment came and Tsunade's water broke before she went into labor. Thankfully, everyone was prepared and transported the Senju to a private room in Konoha's hospital, one expertly sealed off to everyone but the 5 that had been in cahoots in the last 9 months. With Shizune overseeing the delivery, everyone was excited beyond belief in their own way. Minato himself was believing more and more by the second that this would be the happiest day in his life. If only he knew how significant this day in history would become. "Ah!" screamed Tsunade as she was starting to push, fully clad in a hospital gown and a sheen of sweat coating her face. "Come on, Tsunade, you're doing fine," Minato said in soothing excitement as he stood next to the mother of his child. Tsunade gulped in more air to let out another agonizing scream. "Damn you, Minato, this is all your fault, you bastard," she roared at the Hokage as she crushed his hands that held hers as a sign of support. The blonde male did his best to not grunt in pain, but he couldn't help himself from falling to his knees from the woman's deadly grip. "That's it, Tsunade-sama, you're nearly there. I'm starting to see the head," Shizune exclaimed. "Just hurry the hell up and get him out of me." Tsunade shouted back. "You're doing great, Tsunade. Just a little more and it'll be all over soon," encouraged Minato. "Oh, don't give me that. I wouldn't even be in this mess if it wasn't for you," screamed Tsunade. With a sporadic mind in the heat of the moment, she suddenly raised her free hand to strike the young Kage in the face. Before she could hit him, though, Minato quickly used the Kawarimi no Jutsu, substitution jutsu, to replace himself with the nearest thing to him, which, unfortunately for the target, was Jiraiya, who was quickly launched through the wall by Tsunade's punch. "Sorry, sensei, but better you than me," Minato thought sympathetically as he gazed at the Jiraiya-shaped hole in the wall. The legendary shinobi's legs were sticking out and dangling over the broken piece of the wall and were the only parts of him visible from his laid position on his back. Luckily, the room he burst into was empty, leaving no one but the small group to hear his groans of misery. Minato was pulled out of his train of thought when Tsunade screamed again. "Get this fucking brat out before he kills me. It's almost done, Tsunade-sama. Just one more push," Shizune eagerly encouraged. "You heard her, you're almost there. You can do it," Minato added with a growing smile. Tsunade honed her honey-brown glare at him. "Shut up, I'd like to see you try and push out a brat that doesn't want to leave." It was but another minute or so when Tsunade gave one final shout of exertion and the first cries from a baby silenced the room. Shizune wasn't stopped, and with a tender smile on her face she gently grabbed the newborn, cut the umbilical cord, cleaned and wrapped him up in a small blue blanket before handing him to a waiting Tsunade. Just as Shizune handed the baby to her master, she gently said, "Tsunade-sama, allow me to introduce you to your son, Senju Naruto." The tired but happy Tsunade gazed down at the still crying baby in her arms with glistening eyes. "Hello, little one," she cooed as she brushed her hands over the baby's bright blonde hair and round face, smiling with as much love as she could muster. Soon Naruto stopped crying as he looked to his mother to show his curious and bright sapphire eyes. After what seemed like an eternity of childish contemplation, he finally smiled back, making him look all the more adorable to everyone. Look, he has Minato's eyes, not to mention his hair and face. He's like a mini Minato, Jiraiya said with a chuckle, somehow miraculously getting over his injured state in order to see his godson. Yes, but it looks like he has Tsunade's nose, chin and ears. His skin tone is even a lighter shade like Tsunade's, and his eyes are the same shape as hers, spoke Hiruzen as he came over to see his grandson in all but blood. He's beautiful, Tsunade-sama, gushed Shizune as she looked down at her new godson. She then wiggled her finger over Naruto's face, who was following it around with innocent eyes. He is, isn't he? Tsunade whispered more to herself. She couldn't keep the smile from her face as she took in every detail of her baby. In her mind he was the most adorable thing she'd ever seen, and might as well have been the most beautiful and precious entity in the world. Don't you agree, Minato? She asked without looking away. Definitely, and when he gets older he'll be a killer with the ladies, Minato chuckled with a slight gleaming gaze. Hundreds will be chasing after him. Ha, like any of those little hussies or tramps are good enough for my sweet little Naruto-chan. I'm not gonna let any of them even attempt to sink their claws into him, huffed Tsunade, never breaking eye contact with Naruto as he smiled back and even gurgled a bit as if laughing. This of course caused a series of chuckles to come from the others at the image of Tsunade being an overprotective mother and chasing away all the girls away from Naruto in his teenage years. Tsunade-sama, if I may, I'd like to take Naruto to the maternity ward to make sure that he's in good health. I also want to give you a sedative that will make you sleep for a while so that your body can rest and recover from the strain, said Shizune professionally. Fine, but I don't want anyone but you touching my Naruto-chan. Is that clear? Tsunade requested tiredly, the excitement finally getting to her mentally and physically. Of course, I wasn't going to let anyone go near him anyhow. The medical apprentice affirmed before proceeding to give Tsunade the sedative and taking Naruto into her possession. As she walked away Tsunade was already drifting off to sleep while she started doing a little coddling herself to the newborn. Come on, little man, come with your Auntie Shizune and let your mother rest, she affectionately said while walking out of the room with the men following suit. As they left the private room Minato quickly sealed it with a special blood seal, one that would keep everyone except Shizune, Jiraiya, Hiruzen and himself from entering. When Shizune made her way towards the maternity ward for Naruto's checkup, Jiraiya and Hiruzen finally had a moment alone to give their heartfelt words to Minato. Jiraiya good-naturedly patted his student on the back. Well now, Minato, my boy, I believe congrats are in order. You have a son. How does it feel to be a real father now? Good. It feels good, Minato replied with a proud smile that matched the rest of his happy expression. Hiruzen gripped the current Hokage's shoulder as he took a fresh puff from his now lit pipe. I'm truly happy for you, Minato. You'll make a fine father, no doubt about it. Though things may get rough between you and Tsunade with how you'll raise Naruto, I'm sure everything will turn out well between you. Thanks, Hiruzen. Hopefully everything will work out okay, Minato replied appreciatively. Well, now I think it's time to celebrate. Jiraiya jovially exclaimed. Minato, how about we head back to your place and break out that bottle of rare sake you got from Mitsu no Kuni? Land of Honey? That you were saving for a special occasion? I'm sure the birth of your son definitely fits under that category. Besides, we can't let that sweet and delectable sake go to waste, now can we? I mean, come on, anything from that country is some of the best stuff around. He ended cheekily. Minato chuckled while nodding. I guess I'll have to agree with you on that one, sensei. Would you care to join us, Hiruzen? I'd be delighted, Minato, answered the Sandame. Such a day was very deserving of a celebratory toast. But before the three men could leave, a young Anbu agent with a dog-shaped mask and spiky silver hair urgently appeared in front of them. Hokage-sama, we have just received reports that the Kyuubi has appeared nearby and is on its way here to the village. What, the Kyuubi? Minato shockingly retorted. Damn it, why now of all times, especially since Kushina-chan is away on a mission? Minato thought angrily. He turned his serious gaze squarely onto the Anbus. Dog, sound the call for all of our forces to get ready for an attack. Hiruzen, head to the tower and help organize them all from there. Jiraiya-sensei, I need you to help with the evacuation of the civilians. Get them to the shelters as quickly as possible. I'll help set up the frontline defenses outside the village. We absolutely can't have the Kyuubi reach the village or it will destroy everything. ordered Minato with the authority that showed why he was the Hokage. All the men responded, nodded in confirmation, and quickly went to follow their orders. It seems that Konoha is now facing its darkest hour. Let us hope that the will of fire will not be extinguished this night, thought Minato worriedly as he shunshined away and went out to set up the front line of defense for his village. 1 hour later at the front defense line, only a few miles away from Konoha, was the first line of defense where most of Konoha's shinobi were gathered, and all were firm to protect their village with their lives. They were all quiet after given the proper orders and plans, their faces both displaying nervousness along with fierce determination as they waited for their target. They didn't have to wait long. From the horizon and quickly traveling in their direction was the Kyuubi no Yoko, the nine-tailed demon fox, the greatest and most fearful of all the Biju-tailed beasts, whose strength was rumored to be so great that a single swipe from just one of its 9 tails could raise tsunamis and flatten mountains. Despite the differences in power, the proud leaf shinobi were resolute in standing their respective ground, knowing that they were the ones that would prevent the annihilation of their village and their loved ones from being killed. When they finally made contact, they all fought the fox as best they could, firing off jutsus, weapons and a myriad of other strategies, but it was all for naught. Their attacks just weren't effective enough, and whatever damage the monster sustained quickly healed without any problem. When it became obvious how their military might was faring against their opponent, they simply did all they could to slow it down, costing more and more of the lives of their comrades as time went on. After about 2 hours of fighting, the demon was nearing Konoha and could be clearly seen from the outer walls of the village. It was there at the top of the main gates that Jiraiya and Hiruzen were watching the battle with growing concern. They knew that if something wasn't done soon, then the fox would easily reach their home and wreak havoc upon it. As they watched the struggle continue, they were soon joined by the Anbu captain, who was previously commanding the front line and was called back by Hiruzen to give a status update. The captain, who wore a tiger-shaped mask, awaited the Sandame's words as he kneeled. "Tiger, report," Hiruzen ordered sternly. The shinobi nodded. "Currently, over half of our main forces are either dead or wounded. We're constantly being pushed back further and further, and at the current rate our defense lines will be completely destroyed in about 40 minutes at the least, or an hour at best." "Where's Minato? He was supposed to be out there leading them," Jiraiya stated. "Ever since the battle started he's been growing more anxious, especially with the huge lack of Gamabunta or any of the other great toad summons. Hokage-sama was with us when we first clashed with the Kyuubi, but after about 20 minutes into the battle he told me that he was leaving and left me in charge of our shinobi. His last order was for me to have them hold back the Kyuubi for as long as possible. When I asked where he was going, he informed me that he was returning to the village to prepare a jutsu that would stop the demon once and for all," answered Tiger. This of course confused both Jiraiya and Hiruzen. Neither could think of a jutsu that would be appropriate off the top of their heads. Yet, despite their confusion, the Sandame quickly decided to take charge of the situation. "Tiger, I want you to head back to the front lines to aid our forces in holding the Kyuubi back until the Yondaime arrives," he ordered in a commanding tone of voice with a seemingly powerful aura exuding around him, one that Jiraiya had not seen from his sensei in many years. Nevertheless, it served as a quick reminder of why his sensei was known as the Shinobi no Kami, the god of shinobi. The Anbu captain quickly saluted the former Hokage, acknowledging his orders, and shunshined back to his previous commanding position among his comrades. After Tiger disappeared, Hiruzen turned to Jiraiya. "I want you to follow along with him and summon Gamabunta. Help everyone hold back the Kyuubi with the best of your ability, but be extremely careful. I'll go back into the village to try and find Minato and get him back on the battlefield as soon as possible. Hopefully whatever plan he's cooking up is ready." Jiraiya nodded in acknowledgement and was about to head to the battlefield when he suddenly heard a familiar voice. "That won't be needed, Hiruzen." Both shinobi turned around to see Minato behind them holding his 2-hour-old son in his arms. "Minato, where the hell have you been and why have you brought Naruto here? Do you want him to get killed? This is no place for him, and where is Shizune?" Jiraiya exclaimed. "I sent Shizune to help out with the wounded in the hospital since the staff need all the help they can get with all the wounded coming in," answered Minato. "But that still doesn't explain why you brought Naruto here," Hiruzen retorted strictly. A determined gleam appeared in the Hokage's eyes. "The reason I brought him here is because he's going to save Konoha from the Kyuubi." The two older men looked confused, prompting Minato to elaborate. Naruto is going save Konoha by becoming the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. I left to prepare the sealing. Jiraiya and Hiruzen quickly gained looks of shock. Minato, you can't. This is your son for Kami's sake. Jiraiya shouted. The new father lost a little of his composure and forlornly said, I know, but I have no other choice. Minato, how do you even intend to seal the Kyuubi into Naruto? The Kyuubi is wild and too powerful for any normal fuinjutsu, sealing techniques, to allow it to be sealed into Naruto. The only person who had the power to suppress a Biju and seal it away in something in this state was the Shodem, and even then he had his Mokuton ability to help him, the Sandame stated. I plan on using one of the Uzumaki's clan's fuinjutsu, one that Kushina taught me, the Shikifu Jin, dead demon-consuming seal. It should be powerful enough to seal the Kyuubi away. A heavy sense of dread entered the pits of the two men's stomachs. Jiraiya, being well versed in fuinjutsu himself, said, Minato, you can't. You know damn well what will happen to you if you use it. The blonde nodded solemnly with the faintest sad smile. Yes, I know. I'll die. But still, how can you expect to seal the Kyuubi into Naruto? From what you told me, you seal the soul of the person into yourself where the Shinigami will consume both you and the other soul, stated the Sarutobi clan head. I will split the Kyuubi's chakra in two where the yang half will be sealed within Naruto with the Hake no Fuin Shiki, 8 trigram sealing style, while the yin half will be sealed within me with the Shikifu Jin. This will make sure that the evil influence of the Kyuubi will not affect or corrupt Naruto as he grows up. But still, Minato, this is your son. You know what kind of lives Jinchurikis have. They're either turned into human weapons or treated like trash and complete outcasts. The fear people have of the demons sealed away is too great to quell. If you have to seal the Kyuubi in a child, then at least try to consider someone else, Jiraiya said. How can I ask another family to give me one of their children to turn into a Jinchuriki when I myself cannot with my own son? Besides, you can't hope to imagine how hard this is for me to do, sensei. I know full well what kind of life I may be condemning him to, but I have no choice. Minato shouted back. The crack in his usually calm persona drove the point home into the minds of the two men. They knew Minato was the kind of person to follow this path and not waver if he could help it. They both lowered their heads in solemn resignation. Changing Minato's mind didn't seem possible at this point. Jiraiya was the first to break his silence as he gazed tensely at his student. If that's the case, then show me how to do the jutsu and I'll take your place. Naruto is going to need you to be there for him. No. Let me do it. Hiruzen cut in, causing the attention to be on him. I've lived a long life and you both have so much more left to offer our village and the world. Thank you both, but it has to be me, Minato stated resolutely. But, Jiraiya started but was quickly cut off by the blonde. Sensei, I'm the Hokage and it's my duty to protect the village. If anyone is going to bear the responsibility of placing this burden on Naruto, it's going to be me and no one else. Besides, the jutsu and the alteration needed for the sealing is too difficult to pick up in such a short time. Not to mention it's going to require every bit of strength I have, and while I know you're plenty strong, Hiruzen, I'm not going to risk not having enough chakra to complete the process. Same goes for you, sensei, but even if you have the chakra and sealing knowledge necessary, you won't be able to perfect the seal in time. One little mistake can end up killing Naruto and leave us to deal with the Kyuubi. Both Jiraiya and Hiruzen could only sigh in defeat. There would be no convincing Minato once he got this stubborn. The next 10 minutes were hastily spent helping Minato get everything ready for the sealing. Every small moment that went by filled them all with even more trepidation than the last, knowing they were basically preparing the death of someone, two of them along with many more held dear. The second the preparations were complete, a begrudged silence held itself in the air. However, they couldn't let it last long with the situation at hand and tried to give the best goodbyes they could muster. Hiruzen was the first to step up to the current and soon-to-be former Hokage. His wrinkled visage that normally held wisdom and happiness was broken by yet another dark chapter he'd experienced in his life, leaving a shimmering yet strong gaze in his eyes. Farewell, Minato. You are indeed the finest Hokage that Konoha has ever had. Your sacrifice won't go to waste and will only let our village prosper more alongside Naruto. You'll never be forgotten as a true testament to the will of fire. he said mournfully as he firmly shook the Namikaze's hand with his own while giving a gentle squeeze on his shoulder with the other. "Thank you, Hiruzen. That means a lot," Minato replied barely above a whisper. Jiraiya quickly stepped up and gave his student a fatherly hug, trying his hardest to hide the tear that slowly escaped his eye. "See ya, brat," he let out a bittersweet chuckle. "No sensei could have ever asked for a better student. You have no idea how proud I am of you." "Thanks, sensei. You were the best teacher anyone could ask for. That's why I want to ask you to do me one last favor." "Anything, just name it," Jiraiya determinedly replied while stepping back and meeting his student's eyes. "I have drawn a key to the Hake no Fuin Shiki into the abdomen of the scroll toad, Geritora, that will allow you to strengthen or weaken the seal. It'll naturally weaken over time, so it needs to be maintained properly." Minato smiled. "It'll even allow Naruto to complete a special jutsu for his own unique use. Sensei, I also want you to train Naruto when he's older. He'll need to be strong enough to combat the threats that he will face in the future." Jiraiya nodded as if given an order. "You have my word that I'll do my best, Minato. Hiruzen, if you don't mind, I've made you the executor of my estate. Everything is to be given to Naruto when he is old and strong enough to bear the responsibility, and I mean everything. All I have is rightfully his, and that includes the scroll on how to use and create the Hiraishin no Jutsu. It's locked away in my personal safe inside my estate's library. There are also some other things to carry out after I'm gone. It's all listed in my will, and I'd really appreciate it if you could take care of them," Minato requested. "Of course, Minato. I'll make sure that your last wishes are followed," Hiruzen replied with a bow of his head. "Thank you," the blonde said as he looked down at his sleeping son one last time. "Goodbye, Naruto. Know that I love you with all my heart and that my only regret is that I won't be able to see you grow up to become the fine man I know you'll become," he uttered sorrowfully before he kissed him on the forehead in farewell. He turned his away from the others to try and hide the tears that began to freely fall from his scrunched eyes. "And hopefully you'll know how sorry I am from placing this heavy burden on you. But it's the only way I know how to save Konoha from the Kyuubi and protect it from the threats that will come in the future. The village will need the fox's power on its side to survive the impending darkness, and you're the only one I trust to hold it. I know you'll rise to the challenge and become the hero you're destined to be." The blonde regained as much composure as he could before turning to the Sandaime. "Hiruzen, there is one last thing I need you to do. Please tell the people that my last wish is that Naruto is to be seen as the hero he is for containing the Kyuubi and protecting them from it. If they should not, I beg you to make sure that both he and his mother are safe." "I shall," Hiruzen replied with another bow of his head. Minato looked at both men one last back time and gave his best smile. "Don't look so down, guys. It's probably best that this jutsu kills me since I'd probably die later on anyway. Once Tsunade finds out what I'm about to do, I'm sure I wouldn't survive her reaction." He chuckled with a sudden chill down his spine. "She'd probably kill me in the slowest and most agonizing way possible too." The other two couldn't help but let out a minor laugh, as reluctant as it sounded. They could only imagine what the Med Nin would cook up once she awakened to hear the news. Sadly, whatever else that could be said was cut short as Minato quickly made his way towards the battlefield, leaving behind two sad yet proud gazes on his back. When he was near the front lines, he did a few hand seals and performed the Kuchiyose no Jutsu, summoning jutsu, making a giant cloud of smoke appear. It captured all attention, and when it cleared, everyone could see Minato standing on a toad that stood 100 meters high and wore a Yakuza gangster-like robe, along with a pipe in his mouth, a huge dosu, Yakuza sword, on his back and a large scar that went down his left eye. This toad was Gamabunta, the toad boss and the strongest of all the toad summons. "Minato, what's going on? Why did you summon me?" Gamabunta asked, his voice echoing around him for all to hear. "I summoned you to help me fight the Kyuubi," Minato replied seriously. The chief toad finally laid his eyes onto the gigantic fox that was fast approaching them. A deathly serious ambiance overtook his being. "Minato, you can't expect me to fully defeat the Kyuubi. I may be strong, but the fox is stronger." "Yes, I know. That's why I plan to seal the Kyuubi into my son, Naruto, with a special jutsu. Although in doing so it will kill me." The admission both shocked and saddened the mighty toad. Over the years he and Minato had bonded just like Jiraiya before him and held a special place in the hearts of all the toads. "Are you sure that there is no other way to stop it?" he asked feebly. He had a strong inkling that he already knew the answer. "I'm afraid not," said Minato sadly as he kneeled and patted the toad on the head. "Very well. If this is going to be our last battle together, then let's make it one for the history books." Gamabunta grunted and exhaled slowly. "And know that I'll miss you, brat. I and everyone else at Mount Myoboku will always be proud to have had you as our summoner and partner." "And I was proud to be able to summon you," Minato replied. Both man and toad then turned their focus on their opponent, fully intent on stopping its warpath. Minato quickly ordered the shinobi below to fall back to the village. They quickly did so after a moment's hesitation and prepped themselves to watch as their Hokage and his summon did battle with the Kyuubi. For several minutes after their first charge, Gamabunta dodged the fierce strikes of the fox's tails before going on the offensive. Sweden. Teppodama no Jutsu, water style. Liquid bullet jutsu, he cried out ferociously. The giant shot of water launched towards the fox after its latest attempted attack. The jutsu struck head-on but did little more than soaking the beast's fur. The Kyuubi then countered by launching its tails at Gamabunta once again. Gamabunta went about dodging them one after another and even draw his dosu to deflect some of the mighty appendages. After the struggle persisted for a bit, Gamabunta managed to find an opening and launched a powerful slashing strike. The fox did its best to dodge the attack and escaped the worst of it, but wasn't able to avoid a large gash being carved into its side as a result. "Ha! Take that, you nine-tailed freak!" cried Gamabunta with a victorious smirk that immediately disappeared a moment later when the wound healed itself before their eyes. The fox then responded with opening its large mouth and began to gather chakra from its body and the surrounding air. The raw energy compressed into a single ball before it was released as one massive blast of energy. "Shit!" shouted Gamabunta as he began moving to dodge the incoming attack. With a mighty leap of his legs he managed to barely scrape above it, but a large portion of Konoha's surrounding forest didn't remain unscathed. The resulting explosion from the impact was devastating among the foliage and timber, causing wooden shrapnel to rain down and leave considerable damage upon the leaf village. Minato glanced at the effects of the fox's overwhelming technique before quickly getting his mind back into the game. "Gamabunta, let's try a little teamwork." "Right." The toad shouted back and prepared another jutsu. "Gamayuden, toad oil bullet," he yelled while Minato simultaneously cried, "Kaden. Enden, fire style, flame bullet." The oil that Gamabunta fired acted as an accelerant and provided more fuel for the fire attack that Minato launched, creating a conflagration of far greater power and magnitude reminiscent of a giant flamethrower. The combined attack rushed forward with its unique roar and hit the fox with great force. The pyro offensive quickly covered the Kyuubi's body like a quickly developed forest fire and made it start to yell in pain. When the Konoha shinobi saw this, they cheered loudly, believing that the demon had been critically injured, if not killed outright. However, the celebrations did not last long as a massive blast of chakra exploded from the beast and extinguished the fire covering its body, creating a small crater around it from the outward force. Trees were uprooted and blown away along with various debris and many unfortunate shinobi that were within the shockwave's range. Once the violent moment passed, everyone could see the massive charred burns on the Kyuubi's body, making it look like black was the fox's natural fur color. Sadly, just like before, red chakra began to envelop and heal its body. Before the wounds could be fully healed, Gamabunta took advantage and decided to delay the fox by grappling against it in a strong amphibious grip where a battle of dominance began. With simply trying to keep the fox in place and not overpowering it, the toad was able to hold out long enough to let Minato get close and use the Shikifujin. "Now, Minato, this might be your only chance to use it," Gamabunta shouted as his struggle continued. "Right," Minato cried back as he did the seals. "Shikifujin," he shouted. The unsettling form of the Shinigami suddenly appeared behind Minato, its arm piercing through Minato's chest with no hesitation. The ghoulish appendage continued towards the Kyuubi and split its chakra in two, sealing the yin into the Hokage while the yang was sent into Naruto where the Hake no Fuin Shiki appeared on his form. It's done, Minato peacefully thought with a sad smile plastered on his face as he felt the Shinigami pulling his soul away. I leave the rest as well as the future of Konoha to you, Naruto. I know you won't fail me, make me proud. The deed was done and Konoha was saved as Minato's soul and the fox's yin chakra began to be consumed by the Shinigami, sentencing the now former Hokage to an eternity of battle inside its being. The great Yondaime Hokage was dead, but he passed on with a final smile adorning his lips and the knowledge that everyone was safe. The future was unknown to all, but he felt that it was safe in the hands of his son. After Minato died, the Kyuubi's body fell to the ground before all of its remaining chakra erupted in one massive shockwave. The power behind it forced Gamabuta back a bit, making him move in place to protect the blonde father and son from any physical harm. The remaining Konoha shinobi that watched everything conclude were also forced to the ground as even more damage came upon their village, but at this point they'd take it if it meant the fighting was over. Once the dust settled and silence reigned the air, the giant summon sorrowfully gazed upon Minato and Naruto. You were truly a great summoner and friend to all of the toads, brat. Hopefully your son will become just as great as you, if not greater, he said in somber finality before returning home in a puff of smoke. Soon after the toad's disappearance, the remaining Konoha shinobi gathered around the body of their fallen hero and took him back to the village to be buried and honored as the great man that he was. Thankfully, a certain Sarutobi was able to gather little Naruto before anyone else could. 2 days later, 2 days after the Kyuubi attack, the village was understandably still buzzing with activity. Nearly everyone was busy helping with repairs to the village, some parts more devastated than others from the fox's attacks and the conclusive shockwave. But even as the people were busy working, their mood was still somber since it was only yesterday that the funeral service for the Yondaime Hokage and the other shinobi that died was held. There virtually wasn't anyone in the village that didn't lose a loved one, not to mention the loss of the village's greatest Hokage and hero had greatly affected every citizen of the Leaf and many others throughout the country. After the battle, it was decided by the Fire Daimyo and the Grand Fire Council that Hiruzen would retake his position as the Hokage. It was a bittersweet pill to swallow, but he knew it had to be done. At the end of the funeral, Hiruzen announced that Minato had defeated the Kyuubi by sealing its chakra into the body of a young child and that he had asked for him to be seen as a hero. Sadly, just as the old Hokage had feared, the wounds that the Kyuubi had caused by its destruction had caused the people to focus their anger and sorrow at the child. It got so bad to the point that many, out of fear, were shouting for the child's death, claiming the Kyuubi would take over its prison and kill them all. The rest that were asking of same thing seemed to want it done purely out of blinded revenge on the fox. This was stopped when the Sarutobi clan head released a massive amount of killing intent on the angry villagers, both civilian and ninja, causing all to immediately cower at his power. He spoke at how ashamed he was of how they reacted and their dishonoring of Minato's memory and sacrifice. Many had regrettably lowered their heads in shame, but there were plenty that simply shrugged off the feeling and stubbornly held onto their hate. Because of the heavy emotions, Hiruzen declared a new law stating that if anyone ever speaks out or mentions the Kyuubi and its connection to its container, especially to the younger generation, they would be charged with treason and would be executed immediately without trial, making the ordeal an S-class secret. In Tsunade's private hospital room, Tsunade, still resting from giving birth, continued to slumber peacefully in her bed. She would have been awake at this point, especially given recent events, but Shizune decided to administer more sedatives to deal with the added stress that encumbered her to be safe. Hiruzen was at her side, quietly waiting since she was due to awaken any minute. It took a while, but her eyes eventually started to slowly open. Even with the drowsiness, she was no doubt feeling she suddenly gained a second wind and was alert as can be when she caught the form of her sensei. "Sensei, what are you doing here? Where's Shizune? Where's Naru-chan? Where my baby?" said Tsuande, alarmed as she looked around. "Tsunade, please relax. You need to rest. Both Shizune and Naruto are fine," he said calmly, a mood she matched after a moment or two to gather her bearings. "Now, Tsunade, there is something I need to tell you. It seems that the birth caused a lot more stress to you than we had thought, and you have been asleep for 2 days. Also, sadly, when you were put to sleep we came under attack by the Kyuubi." A jolt of shock ran through her body, but he continued before she could give a response. But thankfully we were able to survive the attack and defeat it. She was surprised even further. It was truly hard to fathom how the Kyuubi was defeated since its power was legendary. No one short of her grandfather could evenly fight the fox, and even then he had his Mokuton abilities to aid him. The only exception was one kunoichi named Uzumaki Kushina, who possessed a special chakra that allowed her to suppress the chakra of the tailed beasts and used it in conjunction with her chakra chain technique to restrain the creatures. Of course, more questions were raised in her mind since Kushina wasn't even around the village to properly deal with the threat. Hiruzen was able to guess her train of thought from the look of contemplation on her face and spoke. We were able to defeat the Kyuubi thanks to Minato. He used a special jutsu he created that allowed him to rip the Kyuubi's soul out of its body and seal it into a child. That child, I am sad to tell you, was Naruto. At the very moment that he uttered the last syllable, the room quickly became flooded with a massive amount of killing intent. Hiruzen buckled a bit and even felt his breath escape him, despite the many years of such intent being felt by him over the years. That bastard. I'll kill him. I'll make him wish he was never born. I'll rip him apart till there's nothing but little chunks of left. How dare he do that, my child? She roared as she started to get out of her bed. An aura of absolute fury surrounded her being, the likes of which could make any deity cower in fear. Tsunade, please calm down. There are still things that you don't know yet and need to understand. Hiruzen pleaded as he blocked her warpath out the door and grabbed a hold of her arm. I understand everything perfectly. That bastard sealed one of those monsters into my baby and turned him into a Jinchuriki, and you know damn well how they're treated. When I find that bastard, Tsunade, Minato's dead. Hiruzen interrupted. She paused where she stood. What? Hiruzen sighed sadly. Minato is dead. The jutsu that he used to seal the Kyuubi into Naruto cost him his life, he answered. He went on to explain how the Shiki Fujin worked. When he finished explaining what happened in the battle, Tsunade took a moment to think and just growled in frustration. Her current fury was clouding her mind with the wishes to end the bastard herself, but she resigned to curse his soul to hell later. Right now she needed to be with her son. Sensei, where's Naru-chan now? She asked calmly yet worryingly. Don't worry, I have Shizune and Jiraiya watching him at the Namikaze estate. Can you take me to him? It was more a statement than question. Of course. After they stopped talking, Tsunade quickly got out of her hospital gown and got dressed into her normal attire. The two of them then left the room and snuck through the village, making sure that no one saw that the Senju was there. It didn't take long for them to reach the large mansion that had belonged to the Namikaze family since the founding of the village. The mansion was built behind the Hokage monument and was hidden from view by the tree line in front of it. It had a large open garden in the front of it and a swimming pool in the back. The mansion itself was a large marble 4-story building with hundreds of windows and a double-door entrance that the walkway from the gate lead to. Just from taking a look at its stature, it could be seen to fit dozens of people easily. The Namikaze family had the home built when the village was first founded. The family wasn't a special shinobi clan and were in fact simple merchants who had come when Konoha was built and did well for themselves with the opportunities they were given. They ended up being the wealthiest merchant family in the village due to owning over 51% of the businesses amongst the population and controlled most of the trading infrastructure. Minato was the first member of the family to become a shinobi, and despite him choosing the militaristic profession, he was also skilled in running businesses thanks to training from his parents. It was because of this training that the blonde was able to keep the business tradition running smoothly after his parents were killed. Yet, regardless of owning everything built from his family over the years, he hadn't lived on the magnificent property in a long time. He much preferred to have his own independence after he was promoted to Chunin. That choice was hammered down even more so after the passing of his parents. The memory of their murder would have been a constant and dark reminder in the home, no matter how much he renovated and cleaned the spot where they met their end. Even sealing off the room and ignoring it wouldn't have been enough. That didn't mean he forgot his place of kin, though. He still took the time to use the library when it was needed and even constructed a room to store all of the scrolls that held the techniques he gathered or created over the course of his career. When they entered the mansion, Tsunade and the Sandaime went into the main living room where Jiraiya and Shizune were taking care of Naruto. When the new mother saw her child with Shizune, she quickly raced over to him and desperately scooped him up. She held and squeezed him with all of the love she could project, as if he would disappear from the slightest loosening of her grip. "My baby. Thank the stars that you're okay," she happily cried before she looked down and examined the 3 whisker marks on both sides of his cheek. "Is this result of the sealing?" Tsunade asked Jiraiya. "Yes it is, but don't worry about it. He won't be sprouting any fox ears or a tail if that's what you're wondering. It's normal to see a trait like that in Jinchuriki, since it's sort of a way to show their connection to a specific Biju. And don't worry about the Kyuubi harming him in any way. Minato placed the Hake no Fuin Shiki on him, and there aren't many seals stronger than that." Jiraiya would have continued in his praise of Minato's skill as a seal master, but stopped when Tsunade started to growl at him. The praise was just a quick reminder of what happened to her son. Jiraiya wasn't surprised that Tsunade felt this way. Despite his good intentions, Minato had placed a very heavy burden on their son, and he doubted Tsunade would ever forgive Minato for what he did. "So what happens now?" Shizune timidly asked from the side. "It's simple, we're leaving. I'm not going to stay here and let my son become the village outcast simply because of what that bastard did him. I have no doubt that the villagers and many of the shinobi here will claim he is a demon and try to hurt him in any way possible," Tsunade snarled, daring either Jiraiya or the Sandaime to say otherwise. Jiraiya remained silent since he actually agreed with her. The people wouldn't take too kindly to Naruto's presence. A seed of contempt was planted in the hearts of many villagers, and their future intentions could be dangerous if the newborn were to remain in his birthplace. Hiruzen knew this too well as he saw the reactions many had when details of the fox's defeat were revealed. "You don't have to worry, Tsunade. I won't stop you from leaving if you really wish to do so. In fact, you have my full support," Hiruzen said resolutely. His students were clearly surprised, expecting him to instead argue and convince Tsunade to place her trust in the citizens of Konoha. "What's the deal, sensei? I always pictured you as an idealist," asked Jiraiya. "I am, but the sad truth is I know in my heart that if Naruto stayed he would be an outcast. I promised Minato that I would do everything in my power to see that both Tsunade and Naruto would be safe, and the best way to do that is to let them leave the village." "But wouldn't they see him differently if you announced his heritage? I'm sure they wouldn't think of him as a demon or hate him if they knew that he was Tsunade-sama and the Yondaime's son. Other than Tsunade-sama, he is now the last Senju alive and the son of Konoha's hero," Shizune stated. Hiruzen straightened up. Although that could happen, that would just place Naruto in more danger. If word about him leaked out, eventually other villages and shinobi groups would target him. With his lineage and containing the most powerful of the Biju, all kinds of enemies would stop at nothing to capture or kill him at every chance they get. This is more concerning with Konoha's military strength weakening as well, so all things considered it's best that he isn't here. But I heard that you forbade anyone from speaking of the fox. Besides, you didn't say who the child was exactly, so no one knows that Naruto is the container. Couldn't you just reveal Naruto's heritage to them without revealing the fact that he has the Kyuubi sealed into him?" Shizune inquired. "That wouldn't work. The villagers would notice the markings on his cheeks, and the shinobi that have knowledge in sealing would easily connect the dots due to his age. Word would spread and we'd have to deal with the consequences, and that's just within the village. Outside forces beyond our walls and country would be a given." Shizune looked a little confused, but Jiraiya and Tsunade understood his words quite well. For the young Kunoichi's sake, Hiruzen explained further. "It's simple. If the people of Konoha knew that Naruto was Minato and Tsunade's son, they would treat him like royalty and spoil him rotten. He would become a spoiled and arrogant child that would believe that just because he is the heir of a prestigious clan, he'd be handed power and strength on a silver platter and not value hard work, determination and training. He might even look down on others and believe he is their better by default. There'd even be several factions in Konoha that would seek to use his future power and influence." Hiruzen let out an annoyed scoff. The most notable would be Danzo. Jiraiya's face grew serious and Tsunade even felt a small snarl coming along at the back of her throat from the mere mention of the old warhawk. He has already requested to give him custody of the child containing the Kyuubi so that he can train him to become a shinobi. I'm certain under his care Naruto would become an emotionless boy who would answer only to Danzo himself, especially if he knew who his parents are and the political and business impact that he'd carry. Take everything regarding Naruto into account, and Danzo could potentially have all of Konoha under his control as a potential Hokage. I know that you all see this as a disastrous scenario. Shizune couldn't help but mentally shudder at the thought of her godson helping the old warmonger position himself into such power. His reputation wasn't the best, and from what her master told her, the further away he was from Naruto the better. Like I'd ever let that one-eyed bastard even touch a hair on my Naru-chan. I'll rip out his remaining eye and arm myself if he even thinks about it. Tsunade carefully and angrily muttered back, hoping to not wake up Naruto. That is why it's best that you both leave the village for now. It'd be best if you keep a low profile. We can't risk any suspicion before we're able to properly handle it, Hiruzen responded. Tsunade simply nodded before she spoke. Is there anything else, sensei? I'd like to get out of here as soon as I can. Yes, there is something I'd like to say. Now, as Jiraiya already knows, before Minato died he left me as executor to the Namikaze estate, in which he has named Naruto as heir to the Namikaze family fortune as well as everything that he owned. Won't the council try and seize it for themselves since they don't think Minato-sama has an heir? Shizune asked. They've already tried, but I overruled them. Even if they don't know Naruto will inherit everything when he's older, I still have absolute say over what happens to Minato's possessions. Speaking of which, who'll manage the businesses that belong to the Namikazes, since I doubt you will? Tsunade asked Hiruzen. They'll be handled by Seiwa Genji. He helped Minato's father manage them and continued to overlook them when he died, and Minato inherited it all. He was a good and loyal friend to the family, so we don't have to worry. Everything will continue to run correctly, but he'll be left in the dark about Naruto in case there's a chance he might let his identity slip or someone trying to force information out of him. I believe you should also know that Minato has requested in his will that I have all your debts paid off through the Namikaze fortune. Tsunade and Shizune felt shock overtake them. And before you try and refuse, you don't need to worry about negatively affecting Naruto's inheritance. Even as high as your debts are, they won't make that big of a dent in the family fortune. Minato also set up a trust fund for Naruto which will be paid monthly to you and should be enough to allow you three to live simple but comfortable lives even if you travel around, which seems like what you'll be doing, Hiruzen ended. After a few moments, Tsunade and Shizune got over their shock, and as much as the Senju hated to admit, she was grateful for Minato getting rid of all her debts and taking care of them all. However, she would never truly forgive him for turning their son into a sacrifice, regardless of how noble or selfless his reasons were. Well, if that's all, sensei, I think that once Shizune and I get everything we need to take care of Naruto, we'll leave tonight, Tsunade said, all while gently rocking her son. There is one last thing I would like to say, Tsunade, Hiruzen started, causing Tsunade to raise an eyebrow. I know that you have good reasons to keep Naruto away from Konoha, but I would like you to consider allowing him to become a shinobi of Konoha when he's old enough. Tsunade looked ready to argue. Before you speak against it, you have to remember that the blood of some of the greatest shinobi in the world, including yourself, runs through Naruto's veins. Following the path of a shinobi is instilled in him, and I highly doubt that you could stop him even if you tried to. Naruto has the potential to become as great a shinobi as your grandfather, great uncle and his father, maybe even greater, and he'll need the support of Konoha behind him to help him with whatever enemies he will face. He'll need to be here to claim and protect his fortune and other heirlooms like the Hiraishin scroll anyway, so building a connection would be ideal for everyone. At the very least, he'll be able to make sure his property doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Tsunade frowned, but she had to admit he had a point. After a few minutes of carefully thinking, Tsunade spoke. I won't make any promises of his future in Konoha, but I'll think about it. We will definitely be back to claim his inheritance, though, so a decision will be made by then. That's all I ask, Hiruzen replied with a smile. I think I'll head out as well, sensei. It's best that I travel and reconnect with my spy network. We have to keep an ear out for anyone that might catch wind of anything related to Naruto or Haim. It'd be smart to look for any threats in the future too. Jiraiya said. Hiruzen offered them all a smile. Very well, I wish you both the best of luck. Don't worry, we'll keep you posted on how we're doing, Tsunade assured. 3 hours later, when the night sky had fully loomed over Konoha, Jiraiya, Tsunade, Shizune and Naruto snuck out of the village with none being the wiser. As they left, the Sandaime was looking out the window of his office and at the star-filled night heavens. I look forward to the day of your return, Naruto, for I have no doubt we'll be seeing great things coming from you just like your mother, father and your ancestors, he thought with a slight smile. He then turned to look at the pictures of his predecessors, all of them sharing the same blood as the whiskered blonde. After a few minutes of silent staring and thinking, Hiruzen decided to head home and finally get some rest. Bah, 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 babbled baby Naruto as he finished eating his mashed banana with his fingers and got about half of it around his face and on his bib. Good boy Naru-chan, you ate all you bananas. Although you got at least half it on your face and clothes, you little devil you. Cooed Tsunade as she went to pick up Naruto out of his high chair and smiled at him. Ma, 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 babbled Naruto as he saw his mother coming to pick him up, to which he giggled as she lifted him out of his chair. You're a messy little boy, aren't you? Aren't Naru-chan? Tsunade continued to coo as she looked down at her messy son, who just giggled more, then put one of his fingers in his mouth to make himself look innocent and more adorable. She just shook her head and smiled slightly. You're just like your father, a real charmer when you want to be. Naruto laughed and clapped his small hands together as if agreeing with her. Shizune, I'm going into the next room to change Naru-chan out of his messy clothes. Will you please clean his high chair up and put it away while I'm doing that? Tsunade called as she went to the next room. Certainly Tsunade-sensei, Shizune answered from the kitchen. As Tsunade was changing Naruto out of his dirty clothes, she thought about when she left Konoha and when Naruto was born. During that time not much had happened since Tsunade made sure to keep a low profile. This past year she had traveled mainly around Fire Country and the other smaller nations with baby Naruto and Shizune. They would stay in small villages, towns, or cities for a few months before they would move off again, not wanting to attract unwanted attention. When they traveled or was not in the privacy of her current home, she would put a special henge over herself and Shizune to change their appearance to everyone but Naruto so that he would not get scared or confused when he did not recognize them. This was to make sure that if someone was looking for them, they would be unable to know where to start looking. As they traveled to different places, she would offer her services as a healer to people with different illness or injuries. Though she did not need the money, since the money Minato had set up for Sarutobi to send them through her slug summons was enough to allow them to live simple but comfortable lives. Tsunade did it because it made her happy and gave her something to do when not caring or playing with Naruto. Also during the year, Naruto was growing up to be a very active child. He loved to play around in his playpen with his different toys, and when he started crawling about 3 months ago, he could hardly stay in the same place for too long. He would also grab anything he could get his hands on and that he could put in his mouth. On more than one occasion, Tsunade and Shizune had just barely stopped Naruto from swallowing or choking a coin, a marble, and other small objects. He also had a knack for getting into trouble. On several occasions Naruto somehow climbed up onto a chair, table, or even a shelf whenever he saw something he wanted on them. This resulted in him nearly falling off and getting hurt each time, but thankfully Tsunade or Shizune were able to catch him and keep him from getting hurt. Though Tsunade nearly had a heart attack each and every time it happened. It was after the second one of those incidents that both Shizune and she decided that one of them would always have Naruto within eyesight for their own peace of mind. After Tsunade finished changing Naruto, she lifted him up in her arms and cooed, "Now that you're nice and clean again, you're a handsome boy. Aren't you my little Naru-chan?" Naruto just replied by squealing in delight and clapping his hand again. Tsunade then went out to the main room where Shizune was just finishing putting away Naruto's high chair. She then went to sit down on a chair and began to loosen up her robes and lowered the strap to her bra to expose her left. She then brought Naruto up to it so that he could start feeding. After which Shizune then went to another chair opposite Tsunade and began to read a new medical book she had recently bought. It was just about 5 minutes after Tsunade began that someone suddenly came through the open window that was next to her. With Tsunade so engrossed with feeding Naruto and Shizune in her book, both of them failed to notice the intruder. When the intruder saw Tsunade's current manifestation and what she was doing, he suddenly let out a large cry. Ah! After which the intruder was sent across the room by a massive nosebleed and hit the wall hard, knocking the intruder out. When the two women heard the cry and the thud of the intruder hitting the wall, they both immediately sprung into action. Tsunade went into a protective stance covering Naruto, who was crying after being interrupted from his feeding time, while Shizune went into an offensive stance with her senbon needles out and ready. When the two women looked over at the unconscious intruder, Tsunade growled under her breath angrily and began muttering curses upon seeing whom their guest was. Said intruder was twitching a little with blood coming from his nose and a very perverted smile on his face and drool coming from his mouth. Of all of people and of all times, Tsunade said sourly as her right eye twitched several times, he had to show up unannounced. Jiraiya-sama, Shizune said a bit worriedly as she went over to the now unconscious toad hermit. Shizune, leave him until I at least finish feeding Naru-chan. The last thing I need is that perverted toad watching me as I'm feeding the baby, Tsunade angrily said as she tried to calm down the still crying Naruto. Shizune just nodded in acknowledgement and went into the kitchen to get a few things to treat the toad hermit while her sensei finished. 20 minutes later, after Jiraiya had regained consciousness and his composure, long after Tsunade had fully fixed her robes, Tsunade tried to force Jiraiya to clean up the mess he made, but Shizune volunteered to do herself, saying that she didn't want to risk Naruto catching anything from him. Tsunade was sitting at a table with Naruto being cradled in her arms and Jiraiya was across from them. He was smiling as he looked at them since the memory of Tsunade feeding Naruto was still fresh on his mind. "Why are you here anyway, Jiraiya?" Tsunade inquired with a slight frown. She was still a bit annoyed with him for arriving unannounced in the way he did. "Can't a man come every now and then to visit his godson?" asked the smiling sage. "Not in the way you do," Tsunade deadpanned. "Ah, Haim, don't say that, you make me feel unwanted. Besides, if I had announced my arrival then I wouldn't have been treated with the heavenly sight that I saw not long ago," Jiraiya replied, grinning like no tomorrow. "The boy's living a genuine privilege that is not given to just anyone. I envy his good fortune." Tsunade frowned and snarled at Jiraiya, not missing the perverted meanings behind his statements, while Shizune looked at the older man in disgust. "If I wasn't holding Naru-chan right now you would be halfway flying to Suna right now," Tsunade said through narrowed eyes. Jiraiya just chuckled nervously and decided to change the subject as to why he was really here. "Alright Haim, all joking aside, you're right, there is a reason why I'm here," Jiraiya spoke, all humor leaving his face. Immediately Shizune and Tsunade straightened up and began to listen intently to what Jiraiya had to say. "As you both know, I left the village to reconnect with my spy network to keep an ear open for any news about anything that may concern you or the Gaki here," Jiraiya said while motioning to Naruto. Both of them nodded since they knew this, although Tsunade did frown at Naruto being called a Gaki but decided to let it slide for now. Currently the other villages are watching Konoha closely to see how badly the military strength was hit during the Kyuubi attack and the loss of Minato. Thankfully Sensei's been able to keep the other villages in the dark about how badly Konoha was hurt, so as far as the other villages are concerned Konoha is still strong. Plus, Konoha's alliance with Suna is also another thing to make the other villages hesitant to try anything. "So I don't believe that they'll try to attack the village," Jiraiya informed, to which Tsunade just nodded for him to continue. "Also, no one knows about you having Naruto, so I don't think you have to worry about anyone coming after him anytime soon. But you should still lay low like you've been doing since we don't want any trouble, especially at this point in time," to which Tsunade was in complete agreement. "Another thing I learned just last month, some new group is coming out. They're keeping below the radar so to not attract attention and are highly secretive. From what my informants tell me they'll be big trouble in a couple of years." "What do you mean by that?" asked Tsunade. "The group is currently made up of 6 missing nin and not your run-of-the-mill missing nin." "These guys are all S-class missing nin," replied Jiraiya. This shocked both the women present. S-class missing nin was the highest types of ninjas there were, except for few others who was credited with being given a double S-class rank. Those being Tsunade's grandfather Senju Hashirama, Sarutobi Hiruzen, Hashirama's arch-rival and nemesis Uchiha Madara, and Naruto's father, Namikaze Minato. It made Tsunade especially worried since shinobi of that caliber rarely ever try to work together since they usually end up fighting or killing one another. The only way for any of them to willing work together would be if they were being led by someone stronger than any of them. Tsunade was worried because anyone that was able to get 5 other S-class missing nin working together would have to be incredibly powerful. "Do you know who the members are?" Tsunade asked. "I know one member but that's it. The rest I don't, since like I said, The group is highly secretive, responded Jiraiya. Who is the member that you know of? Our old teammate, Orochimaru. Tsunade frowned upon hearing this. Although she was not there when Orochimaru's treasonous acts were revealed by Sarutobi, she had heard about them not long after. Although she had severed her ties with Konoha, his betrayal still hurt her. He was still her friend at one point. I'm surprised he would be willing to work with others again considering he usually prefers to work alone, spoke Tsunade. My guess is it was a matter of convenience. They most likely protected him and helped him elude the Oinen and us. But knowing Orochimaru, he'll most likely betray them like he did us when it suits him best. Tsunade just nodded her head in agreement. So what exactly do they call themselves? Surely their group goes by some kind of name, and what exactly do they want since S-class missing nins wouldn't really work together without some kind of reason? Shizune asked. They call themselves the Akatsuki and you can recognize them by what they wear. They all dress in the similar outfit. Each member wears dark cloaks with red clouds with a red interior, a chin-high collar, and wear a conical straw hat with small spike-like balls hanging down to cover their faces. As for their plans, I don't really know for certain, but from what my sources tell me they're going after Jinchuriki. To be more precise, they're after the bijus inside the Jinchuriki, Jiraiya answered, shocking both women and causing Tsunade to hold onto Naruto tightly. Are why you certain, Jiraiya? Asked a worried Tsunade, to which the sage just nodded. My advice, Tsunade, is that if you ever see anyone who matches the Akatsuki description, get out and run as far away as you can. Although you could possibly take on and beat one of them, but these guys travel in pairs. When you see one, the other is not far behind, and not even you could take on two S-class nin by yourself and protect Shizune and Naruto simultaneously. Tsunade could not help but reluctantly agree with what Jiraiya had said. Do you know what they want the bijus for? No, I don't, but whatever it is, I bet it not good. But despite this, there is some good news, since they have no idea about who the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi is. Sensei's keeping a tight lip on it all. They know for sure that the Kyuubi is sealed into a child, but they don't know which one, and not counting Sensei, we're the only ones that know that Naruto is Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. As long as that is kept a secret, they shouldn't come after him. This of course gave Tsunade some relief, but the nagging fear in the pit of her stomach was still there. Also, from what I have gathered, they won't make any real move against any of the other Jinchuriki for a while, since they are still trying to recruit more members for their group and funds for financing the operations, whatever they are. It'd be a few years before they make any real move against anyone, and it means we still have time to prepare Naruto, which got a look from Tsunade that said he better not be talking about what she thought he was thinking of. Now Tsunade, don't give me that look. I know you don't want to hear this, but you have to sense it for Naruto's good as well as everyone else's. The Akatsuki members are no amateurs. They will eventually figure or find out that Naruto is the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, and when they do, they will come after him. So when Naruto is old enough, we will have to train Naruto to be a shinobi. At this point Tsunade was about to interrupt, telling him no, but before she could, Jiraiya cut her off and continued. Tsunade, like Sensei said, Naruto has the blood of some of the strongest shinobi to ever exist running through his veins, with you being among them as well. I doubt you could stop him from becoming one, and the stronger he becomes, the better his and our chances are against the Akatsuki when they do finally come. Also, Naruto will have to learn sooner or later that because of whom he is who he related to and what he is, he will always have to watch his back. There will always be those who will want to either use or destroy him because of what he may one day become, said Jiraiya with finality. After Jiraiya finished speaking, Tsunade remained quiet and just looked down at her son, who had finally stopped squirming and was falling asleep in her arms. As she did, she found herself silently cursing Minato for the 1000th time for turning her son into a Jinchuriki. After several minutes of just looking down at her sleeping son, Tsunade finally looked back up at Jiraiya. When she did, Jiraiya saw a look of determination in her eyes that he had not seen in many years. If that's the case, then so be it. When he is old enough, we will both train him. If any of these Akatsuki bastard try and take my son from me, they will have to go through me first, and they will find out firsthand why I am a Sannin, said Tsunade with a fire of determination in her eyes. Jiraiya saw this and just smiled and nodded. He could see that the love she had for Naruto and her maternal instincts to protect her child had reignited Tsunade's fighting spirit, one that he thought had long been extinguished. Shizune herself also made a silent vow as well to help with Naruto's training. Although she was not as strong or knowledgeable as either Jiraiya or Tsunade, she would help to protect her godson in whatever way she could. That night, Tsunade was sleeping peacefully in her room. All was serene until Naruto started crying in his crib. Tsunade woke up to this and got up off her futon. Going over to Naruto, Tsunade picked him up and held him, resting his head on her shoulders while gently rocking him in her arms. Naruto soon calmed down and quieted, much to Tsunade's delight. After another minute, Tsunade said thoughtfully, "I bet you're hungry, my little Naru-chan." Tsunade sat down on her futon with Naruto and prepared to feed him. Just as she was about to open her night kimono, the door to her room opened, revealing Shizune cradling something in her arms. "I'm sorry, Tsunade-sensei," Shizune said. "I came in earlier to change Naruto's diaper when you were sleeping and I was just bringing him back now. I didn't want to wake you." Tsunade then saw that Shizune was cradling a fully awake Naruto in her arms. When the slug Sanin saw that, she knew that something was definitely wrong with this scene. "Wait a minute," Tsunade exclaimed. "If that's Naruto, then who am I?" Looking down at her arms, Tsunade saw that she was cradling a wooden log in her arms. While cradling the log, she turned and saw Naruto quietly attempting to crawl and sneak away from her towards the opened window. As Naruto was making his way towards the window, he then felt an extreme bloodlust approaching and coming from behind him, as well as the sickening cracking of knuckles that became infamous whenever Tsunade was about to dish out a lot of pain. As he fearfully and slowly turned his head, he thought of one word that he thought might have saved him with puppy dog eyes and the sucking of his right thumb, "Mama." Sadly, it did not work and Tsunade sent him soaring out the open window, where she quickly followed after him. The same small figure came crashing hard into the ground, forming a crater in it. The figure transformed back into his real self and was in much pain. He felt several of his bones break and was sore all over. "Oh," Jiraiya mourned, "so close. Damn that Shizune. I was just a few seconds away from paradise. And I was really looking forward to having some of that good stuff she treats Naruto to." But before Jiraiya could finish what he was saying, he suddenly felt a dark shadow hovering over him, as well as a familiar bloodlust and killer intent on him again. He slowly and fearfully turned around and was again faced with Tsunade, who had a sadistically sweet smile on her face again. "You didn't think you get off that easy, did you?" Tsunade asked rhetorically as she hovered over him. As she came closer to him, Jiraiya could only whisper one word: "Mercy." But sadly for the Toad Hermit, there would be none. For about 10 minutes, terrifying screams of pain and abject misery could be heard by all who were still awake. Several miles away, a young couple who were quietly looking up at the full moon and a bright star in the night, when suddenly the women pointed up at a small object was soaring through the air. "Look, it's a shooting star, let's make a wish." "I don't think that a shooting star, sweetheart," said the man. "Then what is it?" asked the women. "I don't know," he replied, when suddenly a loud ear-splitting cry, "Yahoo hoo hoo hooey!" Several miles further away, the shooting star then came crashing hard into the ground, forming yet another crater. The shooting star was in fact Jiraiya, who slowly crawled out of the crater before checking himself for whatever additional damages that was done to him by Tsunade's beating and as a result from the impact to the ground. In any case, he was in for a long crawl back to Tsunade house and a whole world of pain. Meanwhile, back where Jiraiya first landed, a very pissed-off Tsunade was standing outside the first crater Jiraiya landed in and looking up at the night sky. "Damn perverted excuse for a life form," Tsunade stated. "I just might kill him if he pulls that stunt again." After which she then went back to the house to kiss her son goodnight before going to bed again. 1 month later, a month after Jiraiya came to give to his news on the Akatsuki and his failed attempt to be fed by Tsunade, things settled down again. The house even had one new occupant, said occupant being Jiraiya. He had decided to stay for a little while to spend some time with his godson and get to know him a little. In which case, he acted as part-time babysitter whenever Tsunade and Shizune were out helping to treat the villagers. Both women agreed to allow Jiraiya to babysit on the condition that he not try and corrupt Naruto into becoming a pervert like him under the threat of castration and disembowelment with dull kunai and bare hands. It was after a long day from healing a large number of people who had traveled from the outer parts of the village to get Tsunade to treat their various ailments that when she and Shizune came back to the house to find Jiraiya watching Naruto. The baby was playing with 3 small summoned toads that Jiraiya had summoned for Naruto to play with, which Naruto loved doing since he would waddle after the toads as they hop around the room with him trying to catch them. When Naruto saw his mother and Shizune, he squealed happy and waddled over to him mother to hug her, and as he went over to her he said, "Mama," which surprised them since they did not expect Naruto to speak this way for few more months, since he had shown no real signs of trying to speak other than babbling. Tsunade then picked up Naruto and asked, "What did you say, Naru-chan?" "Mama," repeated the blonde baby. This caused her to hug and cry in joy for her son at speaking his first real word. "What a smart boy you are, Naru-chan. You only started walking a few weeks ago and now you're starting to talk." "Naruto, can you say Hakubo, auntie?" "Can you?" asked Shizune as she gained Naruto attention. Nate-chan, Naruto said. "I doubt you'd get any better than that, Shizune," Tsunade chuckled. "Oh well, I guess being his Nate-chan isn't so bad," replied Shizune as she grabbed little Naruto's nose and wiggled it a little, which made him laugh. "Hey Naruto, do you know who I am?" "Do you?" asked an excited Jiraiya when he came up to Naruto to find out what he'd call him. Pervert, replied Naruto as he pointed at Jiraiya, causing the sage to face fault and Shizune to giggle loudly while Tsunade smiled and laughed even harder. "That's my little boy, such a smart boy just like his Ka-chan," laughed Tsunade as she turned around to go into the kitchen with Naruto. "I resent that remark, I'm not a pervert," cried Jiraiya as he stood up. "Then what are you?" asked Tsunade turning around slightly. "I'm a super pervert," grinned Jiraiya, after which an annoyed Tsunade elbowed him in the face and sent him flying to the other end of the room, resulting in him hitting the wall. "Damn pervert," muttered Tsunade as she went to the kitchen with Naruto and Shizune following closely behind. 1 month later. Currently Jiraiya was in Tsunade's house watching over Naruto again. Tsunade and Shizune had gone out to a small farm several miles out of the village to help the daughter of the farmer who was severely ill and in need of treatment. As he was watching Naruto, he was also trying to come up with new ideas for his latest book, but unfortunately he was having a severe case of writer's block. After a while he decided to take a walk around the village since he thought that the fresh air and exercise would do him good and re-energize his writer's imagination. As he walked around the streets of the town carrying Naruto, many young girls and women came over to him when they saw him carrying him. They started to surround them, commenting on how cute he was and adorable his whisker marks made him. Soon enough Jiraiya quickly realized that Naruto was a babe magnet and began cursing himself for not thinking of the sooner. After the women that had surrounded him and Naruto left, Jiraiya quickly ran to the village hot springs entrance where he knew that most women came out at this time to go home for the night, and quickly put his plan into action. When Jiraiya saw a group of women coming out of the hot springs, he quickly acted as though he was about to enter himself. Jiraiya began to hum when the women ran toward him, commenting on how cute Naruto was. "Yes ladies, he is very cute, isn't he?" queried Jiraiya. "Is he yours?" asked a random woman. "Why no, he isn't, he's actually my godson." The women then began to swoon over Naruto, commenting how adorable he was with his whisker marks or how beautiful his eyes were, and asking more questions about him to Jiraiya, who was far too busy looking at their ass to answer any of their questions. As all this was happening, Naruto grew more and more confused as to why all these strange ladies were surrounding him. Unfortunately, the confused look that appeared on his face made him all the more adorable to the women, who began to pinch his cheeks and ruffle his spiky hair. Jiraiya smiled as he continued to ogle the swooning and silently thanked Kami for his godson's cuteness. Things seemed as though they were only going to get better when Naruto tried to grab onto the woman's finger with his small little hand, which earned him even more attention from the women. "Oh, he's trying to grab my finger, he's so adorable, isn't he?" said a brunette woman. Naruto, who was still a little confused at where he was, but when he looked up to see his godfather smiling back at him, he immediately giggled and decided to enjoy all the attention and began to bounce up and down in his godfather's arms, which only made the women attract to him even more. Jiraiya couldn't believe that Naruto could get him this much action and made a mental note to hint to Tsunade that he could watch him whenever she needed him to. Jiraiya began to think about how he could milk this even further when he suddenly remembered the time when Naruto wouldn't stop crying when he first babysat for Tsunade, and he summoned a toad which he almost squeezed into oblivion. Jiraiya smirked and patted himself on the back for his brilliant thinking, and then quickly summoned a small toad and ordered the toad to hop into Naruto's view. While Naruto was hopping up and down in Jiraiya's grasp, the toad jumped onto Jiraiya's shoulder. Naruto immediately stopped bouncing when he saw the toad and began to reach for it. The women awed at Naruto's actions and became even more infatuated with the young boy when he was able to get a hold of the toad and begin hugging it for dear life. Unfortunately, as Jiraiya was busy trying to make his move on the young village women, Tsunade and Shizune were entering the village after finishing with helping to treat the daughter of the farmer. They then decided to head for the hot spring to relax a little before returning home since they believed that they deserved a little downtime after helping the young girl. When they were nearing the hot spring entrance, they saw a large group of women surrounding a tall white-haired man with a small blonde-haired boy in his arms who was squeezing a poor toad to near death. Tsunade quickly realized that the blonde boy was her son and the tall white-haired man was Jiraiya. She then quickly realized that Jiraiya must have been using her son to attract women. When she realized this, one thing was on her mind. Kill Jiraiya, slow and painfully. As Jiraiya was about to make a move on the women, he suddenly felt a sense of dread wash over him and realized that his teammate must be somewhere nearby. Jiraiya's fears were confirmed when he turned around and saw Tsunade stomping right towards him with a very angry Shizune right behind her. She too knew what Jiraiya was doing with her nephew, little brother, godson, and for once she would not try and calm Tsunade down. She would actually help her kill Jiraiya. "Hi Saya. What's up?" asked a very nervous Jiraiya. "Oh, not much, I was just coming back from helping that young farm girl who got ill and decided to come here to relax a little, and then I saw you and Naru-chan here. I was just wondering why you were here when I thought you'd be at home," said Tsunade all too sweetly for Jiraiya taste. "Oh, well you see, I just wanted to spend some time with him, and as you can see he is very happy," spoke Jiraiya nervously as he tried to come up with a good excuse so to avoid being beaten to a pulp by Tsunade and probably Shizune as well. When Tsunade looked at Naruto, he was indeed happily squeezing a poor toad to death. "Well Jiraiya, tell your friends goodbye because we need to get Naruto back home before it gets too late since it's nearly his bedtime," said Tsunade with a look in her eyes that promised pain when they got back. Jiraiya informed the women that he and Naruto had to go and all the women sighed, though knowing that the boy's mother wanted him home. So they reluctantly said goodbye to the pair. "So Saya, let's get going," said Jiraiya. "Oh, I agree wholeheartedly," said Tsunade, who took Naruto away from Jiraiya, who began to walk away. "And just where are you going, Jiraiya?" said Shizune, who was twirling her senbon needles, which made Jiraiya very nervous. "Back to the house like you said." "Oh, we have a much quicker way for us to get there," said Tsunade. Tsunade and Shizune each then placed their hand on Jiraiya's shoulders and the four of them were shunshined back home. "Well Tsunade, I should get going. You can put Naruto to bed and I'll go myself since I better get back on the road again," Jiraiya quickly said and tried to get away, but Tsunade grabbed him by the collar and forced him to the ground. Tsunade looked at Jiraiya and then told Shizune to put Naruto to bed while she had a talk with the terrified toad sage. Shizune left the room with Naruto, who was cuddling the toad, while Jiraiya pleaded with Tsunade. "Shizune, before you put Naruto to bed, see if he might be hungry," said Tsunade as she began to crack her knuckles. "I will, sensei, but please save a piece of him for me, please," Shizune replied as she went to the next room. "I'll try, but no promises. I'm sorry, I just wanted to take Naruto to meet some new people, that's all, I swear," pleaded Jiraiya on bended knees. "I see. Jiraiya, I would like you to meet someone that you are very familiar with." "Who?" "The end of my fist." After which for the next hour screams of pain from a certain super pervert could be heard for several miles around. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.